So we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll call the meeting to order. Debbie, if you would note our current attendance, please.
Noted.
Thank you. All right. First up on the agenda is our agenda review, just to make sure everybody's on board with the agenda and any modifications that people would like to make. Now is your chance to propose modifications to it, or propose that we approve the agenda as is and continue with our business tonight.
I would like to amend the agenda.
Okay, Lori, you'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda?
Yeah, I would like to have an opportunity for the board just to talk about the approach that we're utilizing in our meetings, so we can discuss it fully.
Okay.
I second that.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion anybody would like to have on that request? So I guess I'll discuss it briefly. I'm not entirely sure I know what that means. So I don't have a sense that I know what you mean by discuss how we, well, can you repeat the motion? I want to make sure I get it right.
Oh, yeah, I would like to make the motion that we talk a little bit about the webinar that was presented to us, email, and talk about the speaking chart. Also about how agenda items are placed with our meetings, and just see how, if there's questions and if people wanted to discuss it.
Okay, thanks. I wrote some of that down. So some of those things are kind of queued up for future meetings, and we have a really busy meeting tonight. I guess that's my feedback on that. But anybody else, any conversation?
Yeah, I would just say that the idea of the speaking chart was pushed off to another meeting because this one is so packed.
Right.
And
Yeah, I guess it would have been nice to know that as a board member, but
So
until now, I mean, it would have been nice to know what you guys were planning on prior to me coming forward and asking for the amendment in the agenda. I guess that's where I'm a little baffled sometimes with,
well, you didn't ask that specific question. I know that Shelley did, and that was the answer that was given, is that was put for a different meeting. She asked ahead of time.
oh, she did.
That.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Yes. Before we go any further. So I think so the items that were requested to be amended, or to have the agenda be amended, is the actual topic of amending the agenda. And that's put off to another meeting.
That is not the motion that was made.
Yeah, that's
the motion
Okay.
that was made was to talk about our approach to meetings. Is that right, Debbie?
Well, what
I think,
wrote down was,
I think what I'm trying to clarify, and I'm not sure why we're dancing around this, but we were given an email about a webinar and how we were doing speaking charts. Also how to amend the agenda if we want to possibly have something added to the agenda. And I know that that takes 4 to support that. I believe that's my understanding. I just felt that there should have been more discussion about it with the board as a whole. What I didn't know is that it is being pushed to another meeting.
yeah, maybe this
Until now, until this discussion.
Or the only change that's been made of any nature was the idea that we were going to give people an opportunity to request amendments at the beginning of the meeting. Otherwise, there's been no change in process, no change in anything.
So we have discontinued the speaking charts,
We never
and
did speaking charts, but that we're off topic. So the motion to amend the agenda was made and seconded. We should finish this discussion before we do anything different.
So I think the approach to our meetings is kind of the umbrella maybe topic. And I think from what I'm hearing is maybe there might be a couple or 2 or 3 things that fall under that umbrella specifically. And correct me if I'm wrong, Lori. The speaking charts was one of them.
Yeah.
Amending the agenda. We never really discussed that as a board to see if that was going to be enforced or we really wanted that. And the third, maybe there's only 2, but I think that's my understanding is what you want to amend the agenda on. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
more or less. I think what I'm finding increasingly difficult, and maybe we're off a point, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that as a board member, since I have really no role other than being a board member, even if I ask for an agenda item to be placed on the agenda, there is at least 4 that can technically not put it on the agenda. Okay, I understand that. I guess my second opportunity would be to amend the agenda if I wanted to discuss it on, hopefully, to discuss it further on the agenda, but then it would take 4 board members to support that, I guess,
Right. I think
motion to amend.
Yeah.
And so it's leading me to wonder is what is the purpose to the other board members if they cannot, if they don't know whether or not their agenda items will be added to the agenda or not.
I want to just say point of order, and we need to really get clear about our motions. If we're going to have a motion about adding items to the agenda, that should be delineated. So should we finish up what we're working on, the approach to meetings? And then if somebody wants to make a motion about specifically talking about adding items to the agenda, then we can do that.
Right, agreed. I was going to say that as well. So it's been moved and seconded to modify the agenda to talk about our approach to meetings. I'm going to call the vote and see where we are because we have a lot of business tonight. So all those in favor of modifying tonight's agenda to discuss our approach to meetings, which include a number of different topics, including adding agenda items, it sounds like, signify by saying aye. And Debbie, if you would run through us, that would help again.
Yes. Jonathan,
I'm going to say nay, no.
Jennifer,
I'm not clear about the motion, so I'm going to say no. But if a more specific motion comes up, I'm willing to listen.
Janet,
Yes.
Tom,
Nay.
Lori,
Yes.
Shelley,
Yes.
and Irv is not with us. So we have 3-3. 3 nays, 3 yays.
So can I make a specific, actually, I'd like to make a specific amendment to the agenda.
Okay, let's finish this one first. So it was 3-3, which indicates it did not pass. So yes, Shelley, go ahead if you'd like to propose.
I'd like to make an amendment to the agenda to speak specifically about amending the agenda idea and how that relates to our policy, as well as the tally chart that was sent to us by board chair or vice chair Jennifer Traeger a couple of months ago and what that means. And the third one is other items on the agenda that's been removed, usually that we have at the end of our agenda before we adjourn. So those 3 specific things.
Okay, so moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on Shelley's proposed modified agenda?
I would be willing to talk about one of those things tonight, the agenda amendment.
But
I
not
think
the
having
Okay.
having a motion with 3 things on it, I think is overwhelming at this point. I would like to
Okay.
narrow it down to one thing. And that one makes the most sense to me, the one about amending the agenda at the beginning of the meetings.
Okay.
So the motion, however, was to modify it
Yep.
with 3 items. So
Yes, I'm just explaining why I might vote no, because I'm just explaining my reasoning.
So can I modify the motion
you can withdraw it if you'd like.
and then re-enter a new one?
You may.
Okay, I'd like to withdraw the previous motion of the 3 items to amend the agenda. I'd like to motion to amend the agenda to specifically talk about amending the agenda topic.
Okay. So moved.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Where my question would be, where would we put it in the agenda?
Yeah, that would be mine too, and I would suggest it would have to go at the end.
I think it might be helpful if we have it as a part of our training with OSBA, with Renee and Sarah.
I would be fine if it came up during that training session as well.
I
That we
believe
were
it
all-
will be part, I believe it will, Shelley. Just-
Okay, I think that would be really productive. That way we can all be on the same page and have the same conversation at the same time.
Okay, so the motion is to request, I'll try to clarify and summarize, Shelley, to request that during the OSB training section of our meeting, that we make sure we cover the question about the agenda review at the beginning of the meeting.
And Renee just put in the chat that it is part of the training.
Great. Okay,
So may
Do
not
we
even
still
have to
need
do
to
this,
finish?
but it's been moved and seconded. So I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of discussing this during the OSBA training signify by saying aye.
Jonathan.
Aye.
Oh,
I'm going to say aye. I agree. Let's do that.
Jennifer.
can you go through the roll call? I
Yeah.
think that's much clearer.
I have a yes from Jonathan. Jennifer,
Aye.
Janet,
Aye.
Tom,
Dang, it's redundant. Renee clarified it's in it already.
Lori,
Aye.
and Shelley.
Yes.
Thank you. 5-1.
Okay, so with that modification, I will accept a motion to approve the modified agenda as we've just discussed, which is essentially the posted agenda with a caveat that we will make sure to cover that topic during OSBA training.
I move to approve the amended agenda.
So moved.
I'll
I
second that.
second it.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Let's call the vote. Debbie?
Jonathan,
Aye.
Jennifer,
Aye.
Janet,
Yes.
Tom,
Aye.
Lori,
Aye.
and Shelley.
Yes.
6 yeas.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So next up is the K-5 school reconfiguration topic, and we should jump right in.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I have Leslie here as a panelist as well. And we want to talk to you about the K-5 reconfiguration that was started a few years ago. And I went back and read the presentation. I have seen the video of the board meeting where that was presented. And first of all, it's really good work, excellent work. The committee was well represented. Both principals were involved. One of the principals has now been promoted to our Director of Teaching and Learning. So Leslie has a lot of background knowledge on that. I have the presentation here and I'd like to run through that with you. And I'll share that on the screen. It's the same presentation that you saw back in 2019 in March at the board meeting, okay? And so it's just that many of the players have changed. And so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. You guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. And so, so like I said, the work group was created, and you can see that there was quite a diverse selection of people who were on that committee. The 2 district level administrators, of course, are different now, as well as some of the staff and their roles. We also had parents involved too that were part of the presentation. And what I'd like to do is run you through the presentation again, knowing that 2 of you didn't see it at that time. And the reason why the board didn't take further action to approve the plan is because those 2 board members were only serving for another couple months. And out of respect to the positions that were coming open, they wanted to leave it up to the board once they chose their additional board members. And then, of course, you know, we had some distraction that lasted for some time. And so this was put on the back burner, and I'm bringing it forward because this is a very important topic that we talk about. And it's 100% student-centered. And so with that in mind, I'm just going to go ahead and run you through the presentation. And you can see that the charge of the work group was to define the problem and to come up with the implications for the change, and then to create some recommendations and timelines. And in each of the slides, I highlighted what the most important parts are, at least in my opinion, but nothing's been changed on the presentation, if you will. So the documents and data that were revised were the school district enrollment work group report. We used a demographer at Portland State. All major districts in the Portland metro area use that department at PSU. It's a nationally renowned department that deals explicitly in demographics and demographic projections. Enrollment summaries, the strategic planning document, of course, and any research and literature that pertain to K-5 models. And they met twice for 3.5 hours each in February and March. So they started with defining the problem. And there was a problem, if you remember, with enrollment at Mark Twain. There was near enrollment capacity, the enrollment capacity of Mark Twain is 350 students. And then you have Robert Frost. And Robert Frost, correct me if I'm wrong, Leslie, because I'm doing this from memory, is 475, correct?
We're at about 400 right now, but yeah, we fluctuate between 400 and 500.
Yeah, so the capacity was, yeah, okay, between 4 and 5. And those numbers, these are old numbers, but the numbers have not changed a lot. Robert Frost graduated a large group of 5th graders, which changed the numbers a little bit, but they're pretty much right on. The other thing is, we don't know the full extent of what COVID has done to our enrollment either. So we need to kind of take that with a grain of salt. And the numbers I have here in front of me, I have them somewhere, are not that much different than the numbers you see on the screen. I'll have to pull those up in a minute. I lost them, here, there. So we have, the current is 309 students at Mark Twain, and we have 372 students at Robert Frost, and they graduated a large 5th grade class. But we're pretty much in the ballpark. So that's the enrollment side. So we have a larger 3-5 elementary being fed by a smaller K2 primary, if that makes sense. So that was one of the main issues that they wanted to try to address with the K5 reconfiguration. And the summary of findings, the work group members, they also discussed the following, and I highlighted the most pertinent parts. Although, and all of these are important, but the 3 to me as a superintendent are, number 1, the transition impact between grades 2 and 3. That is a huge one. I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward, because that's a critical age for kids. where they go from breaking the code and blending words to learning to read and then becoming fluent readers and then reading to learn. That's a really critical transition to get kids reading proficiently by 3rd grade. I'm going to go down to the second point in yellow, and that's the benefit of a 6-year continuum and improved opportunities for growth in one school setting. There are mountains of evidence that suggest that a child who remains in the same school for 6 consecutive years is far better to master the skills necessary than a child who goes from K2 and makes another transition to a 3-5, and then another transition to a large middle school or K8 middle school for 3 years, and then on to a big high school. That's a really key factor in the research. And then the third point in yellow is the evidence demonstrates that schools with fewer transitions are generally higher performing schools. And we know that because which of the schools are the higher performing schools in the district? Our K8 schools, right? Those are the schools with the least amount of transitions. That's the research for why, the compelling reason for why most districts go to K8. There's a historical factor in Silver Falls as well. But one thing we know is that we take out the transitions for kids, they actually end up doing better if they stay put. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Mm-hmm. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
Leslie, did you have anything you wanted to add? No?
No, I think you did a good job summarizing.
Okay. And so this just shows you the enrollment capacity versus the current capacity versus enrollment. And this is just a way of showing that Mark Twain at that time was getting pretty close to capacity. The same with Robert Frost at the time. And then you had schools that were under capacity in Scotts Mills and Silvercrest. And Leslie, I'm going to defer to you on the compelling reason for this slide, but it has something to do with balancing out our students who transfer something.
Yeah, with the growth in the city of Silverton, I think the committee was really looking at considering this and capacity levels when we do the boundary work, because there are kids right now way out on South Abaquaw that are in the Mark Twain Robert Frost boundary that are physically closer to Scotts Mills. And there are students up on, oh gosh, I can't remember the street now, that are in the newer development on the way up towards Silvercrest that are pretty close to Silvercrest. So they recommend it. You'll see in the recommendations that you look at when you draw the boundaries, perhaps considering those 2 schools as well.
And this is just this graph is to show that we have been increasing in enrollment. Of course, this year, again, even last year, starting in the spring is an outlier. So we'll have to see how that winds up affecting Silver Falls. But the compelling reason that the committee wanted to make is that we're a growing district. And then the summary of findings, the implication, came back with what are the best reasons to do this. So they came back with their findings. What are the best reasons to do this? And what are the best reasons not to do this? Okay, so I just went ahead and you know, it's hard to read in PowerPoint when something's single spaced in one paragraph. So I just went ahead and highlighted the main parts. All of this is on Board Book as well for you to read at your convenience as well. But to me, the most compelling things are the 6-year instructional continuum. And there's the data use, the intervention support, the established relationships of students and staff, and the elimination of the transition. And I would say from my area of expertise as an instructional leader, when you have a school that's K-5, it is far easier and much more clear to align things like guaranteed and viable curriculum, a standards-based curriculum based on a K-5 model where students are going through the curriculum. It's vertically aligned. All kids are getting the same instructional model. The interventions are aligned to those grade level standards as well. And so the children are transitioning to a whole nother school that might be doing things a little bit differently. or that don't know the kids very well. So by the time kids get to second grade at Mark Twain, they have 3 years worth of data. And once they have that data and they understand the whole child, that child then leaves and goes to another school, and that other school doesn't know this child. No matter how much collaboration takes place, there will still be lag time for Robert Frost to understand where this child is and what skills they really have. So that to me is a really compelling issue. The other thing when we're talking about transitions is keeping families whole. And we have families in the district that have 5 kids, have 5 kids in 5 different schools. And 2 of those schools are Mark Twain and Robert Frost, right? And so the idea also is to keep families together, and that would come out in a K-5 model, but we're talking about also school boundaries as well. That would come into the mix. And then at the bottom, this was put in here. Making the change prior to the next bond election makes sense because there were recent facility improvements at each school and would allow for K-5 use. And so, Leslie, I don't know if you want to add to that, or do you have anything to add?
Mostly it was when we transitioned Mark Twain into an elementary from a middle school, we did put resources into that. So it is appropriately set up as an elementary school now, so it would make sense to use it as a K-5 building, not just a K-2 building, is what the committee felt.
When I went through the best reasons not to do this, I just want to give you my honest opinion as a professional and as a practitioner. We'll go through these reasons, but I want you to kind of think about the reasons as adult issues versus kid issues. Okay, that's really important to distinguish between the two, because when we go through the reasons not to, in my opinion, as a professional administrator and as a practitioner, these to me look a lot more like adult issues to be solved, not necessarily what's in the best interest of our students. So the first one is potentially divisive in the community, a split town with new attendance boundaries, friendships, social connections, logistics of this change, staff assignments, movement of staff, attendance boundary committee. All those are, of course, can cause some consternation amongst adults in the community, not necessarily kids. And that a change might be disruptive for students at first. And so we need to work out some sort of way for how we want to grandfather kids into each of the K-5 schools, or how we want to do that. And we take a lot of community input through that process as well. And then the whole idea of a bad school versus a good school. So those to me put the responsibility back on us as adults to do something about that. What we're talking about with going to a K-5 configuration is actually what's in the best interest of our students. And what's in the best interest of our students is to have 6 continuous years of high quality instruction without a transition at a very critical age. And what are the challenges to overcome? Creating equal quality schools. Of course, we're responsible for that as leaders and stewards of Silver Falls School District. And the similar demographics of each school, which would need to be talked about during the boundary adjustment. How to communicate this need to the community, of course, including clear reasons in support of students. Sure, we might have some transportation things to work out and logistical things, but I don't foresee that as being a huge issue. Last thing that I highlighted is staff placement questions. Of course, that would be an HR issue, and we need to work through that. Sufficient curriculum and instructional resources. Again, our charge as central office administrators is to make sure that every single one of our schools is well resourced. That's low-hanging fruit, in my opinion. No school in the Silver Falls School District should be going without the tools they need to succeed. And then, Leslie, maybe you could take us through the I wonder piece, if you recall that, what the compelling reason was for that.
We did an activity as a committee asking, we basically had the same conversation that Scott just shared with you, is kid issues versus adult issues, and really to help us focus on students and that the student issues are our highest priority. We went through and did an I Wonder activity. And so this was just sharing out that information. It's not a whole lot of pertinent information, I think, to the actual discussion.
Okay. And then we have recommendations. I guess there were some core values, and that's student engagement, professional excellence, a culture of integrity. And then the one that comes up a lot, of course, is unique schools. And we want to keep the uniqueness of our schools, but at the same time, remember that we are a school district, that we're not a district of just independent schools. And so that's a really important clarifier there. The work group was unanimous in their recommendations to the board at that time. And they used a consensus building and priority activity to do that. And that these recommendations should be considered for board action. And so recommendation number 1 is there is unanimous agreement by the work group members to recommend this to the Silver Falls School Board, the Mark Twain School and Robert Frost School be converted to K-5 configurations. And it says below that, while no timeline was specified, the group believes this change should occur during the 2021 school year. And that's where we are now. And so we know we're still a ways out. Should we decide that this is the direction we want to go? But more of a reason why we need to get started now. The recommendations, additional recommendations are develop a plan to support staff member transitions, and that would come from our HR department taking the lead on that. Develop a phase-in plan for existing students in each school. I touched on that briefly. And adjustment of attendance boundaries to create 2 K-5 schools of similar demographics. That to me is where the work is, where the heavy lift is. And we will need to be really thoughtful about what we want that process to look like, including and suggesting that we may need to bring in an outside firm to help us with that. Those can be very, very sensitive topics, especially for a multi-generational community. And I think it's something that's going to require a lot of thought. And the 5th recommendation is review all school attendance boundaries, especially those schools with capacity for enrollment, in Scotts Mills School and Silvercrest. All we're talking about is capacity. We're not talking about anything other than that. We're just talking about our schools all working at the appropriate capacity, because all things are connected to all things in a school district. And so the committee, the work group is recommending that as well. Any further questions?
Not sure it's a question. I want to comment. You know, it was kind of exciting when we heard this the first time. I remain excited about the idea. What are you thinking in terms of your own next step, right? I mean, so we kind of have this skeleton of a plan, but what is, from a practical perspective?
Well, I think what we need from you is for you all to spend a little bit of time going over the data that was shared. I would like to revisit this in 2 weeks to see where everyone is. And I'll be calling just to check in with you to see if you have questions for me. But what we need first is for the board to vote on it, that this is the direction we want to go. And you guys were all set to do that, except you had 2 board members that wanted to be respectful of the incoming board members to make that decision, since they would be on the board when this configuration was complete. So that's what I would like to see happen. We also are bringing back the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee, and all of that it was put on hold because of the pandemic. And this seems to fall nicely into that category as well. And the other thing is that this is the perfect year to move forward with something like this. because we're in a remote situation right now. You know, we're caught up with distance learning and all kinds of other things, but it's actually a really good time for us to get moving on this, because when kids do come back, I'm not talking about in a hybrid model now, I'm saying coming back to school fully, like we would experience normally, we really need to have this plan underway. It looks like an extremely doable plan as well from my standpoint. I know from Leslie's standpoint as well, being part of this work for several years now. So to me, this is an extremely doable project. And in my professional recommendation is that we should absolutely move forward with this when you're comfortable after you've had a chance to review the data and the information I've shared with you.
Thank you.
Janet has her hand up.
Hi, Janet.
Hi. So somewhere in this document, I saw the step requiring public input. Has
Yes.
that happened yet? And if it has not, would it happen prior to our decision or after the board's decision?
Leslie, do you remember if it was what the public input was when you all presented this?
So we presented at a regular board session, but I don't recall there being much public comment on our presentation or at the next board meeting about that.
So would there be a plan then to have more of a town hall kind of forum?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think yes, and we can do that, Janet, no problem. I think for me, the thing that the thing that I can impress upon us right now enough is that we've got to come into the modern era of elementary education and a K-5 model. We just have to. It's best practice. The K2 3-5 model is a model that it goes against all current best practice and what the research is telling us. So yes, we can absolutely do that. Absolutely. But the longer we wait, the longer that we're subjecting our community to an instructional model that is not ideal.
Right, and I'm certainly not suggesting that because I'm in disagreement.
Oh, sure, I know.
And there may be a way to do it that doesn't cause confusion. You know, nobody likes to ask what their opinion is, and then you just do what you're going to do anyway. But there might be a way to do it, and so that just is informative and transparent and allows the community to at least share their concerns and to be able to address those.
I think I did get feedback after the presentation, and it all revolved around the boundary situation. And so for me, I am 100% in support of this change because it is what's best for kids. I know that's what's best for kids. When the presentation first was given, my concern was the adult issues and how those were going to pan out. But I trust you, Leslie and Scott, and your team to move forward and try to make those issues, have less friction and more smoothness in the process. So that's just where I'm at on it.
And boundary issues are difficult. Let's be perfectly honest, and let's bring that out. I've been in 3 different districts now, and there's not one district that goes through a boundary change where it's easy. It's because it's not. These are difficult conversations, but it's not a reason not to move forward when we're talking about what's best for our community's children.
Do we reevaluate those boundaries on a regular basis? Is there a schedule or calendar by which we do that just as a course of business, or not necessarily?
You know, that's a really good question, Janet. I don't have a clear answer for that, but I can certainly follow up.
We did do that as part of this process, I think. Well, no, it was before this. There was, when the recommendation came out of the enrollment work group to, you know, make the 2K5s. And that work group did go through a big binder and looked at the boundaries. And that at that time, there was a decision not to change any boundaries. But I don't know if there's a calendar. I think that's
No, it seems to be opportunistic. I think the time that occurred before that was when they shut down Monitor Elementary, and they were forced by necessity to review boundary adjustments, and so undertook it then as well. So it tends to be, again, more opportunistic than cyclical, Janet.
Shelley, did you have a question?
I did. I tried to jump in there, but I
Go right
raised my
ahead.
hand even. So
Go right ahead.
I did. I do remember this presentation, and I do remember Leslie being there and multiple committee members being there. It was an excellent presentation, and yeah, we put it off, you know, in consideration for the new board. And I think I, you know, as an educator, K through 5 is definitely, or, you know, and better K through 8, it is so much more stable for children. And yeah, there is mounds of information that show that. My only biggest concern is the boundaries. And you know, I guess I'm not familiar with the process of how to go about doing that. And I feel like, and Leslie, you might know this, but I feel like there was a boundary change, or they were looking at it like 8 years ago or something like that. But I would love to learn more about the boundary process. Everything else is, I agree. You know,
Yeah.
we have a small town, and
Oh,
the
sure.
layout of our town. Yeah, I think I'm just more of a learner here at this point.
Yes.
About the boundary process. So
Yeah. That's a good point, Shelley. I think I think if we can get to a point where the next board, where you all have had time to think about this, to ask questions, to review the data, and we got to a point where the board could vote on whether or not to move forward, then we can go ahead and start taking a look at what the process is, because we're not just going to jump in and start redrawing boundaries. There's a very prescribed process for how we would do that. And a lot of the input will come from the community by way of a boundary committee.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. I'll move forward with it. It's a great idea. And I've been on the board for a while now, so I've kind of molded over, you know, for this long. So anyway, thank you.
Sure. Absolutely. Other questions?
Yeah, Scott, you there?
Yes, Tom, go right ahead.
Janet asked, there's never been a real schedule for looking at boundaries. It's just kind of like Jonathan said, it's been opportunistic. And a former board member told me once, I think it was Beeson, he was on OSBA, and he heard lots of stories, and he said the boundary changes are a lot harder on the parents than the kids. And I kind of thought that was really, you know, I'm very supportive of the boundary changes, and I think that as a board and whatever the committee does or how we do it is that we set up the process and the criteria, and I think you said you'd probably have outside professionals come in and help with the demographics and the changes possibly and redraw the boundaries. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, we'd want to make sure it's as above board, clear, transparent. Everybody understands what the decision rules are, and before the committee makes a recommendation.
Yeah, no, and the reason I said that, I mean, ultimately the committee will have to approve, you know, whatever the professionals recommend or guide us through, but you know, I think everybody should try to honor whatever whatever those professionals recommend before we ask them to go do it, because after they come in with their recommendation, that's when the adults are going to come out that feel impacted on it. And we need to, and it doesn't, I can't see any boundary change that's going to make everybody happy. Somebody's going to be upset.
Yeah, I think
And
what
we
would
need,
happen
we need
is
to, we need to make, we
Go
need
ahead.
to, we need to stand firm and support that decision. Because if we don't, I don't think we as a board or as a boundary committee want to start tinkering with whatever the, you know, the consultants who hopefully are, you know, are reputable and have done this before come up with, because you'll just open up a can of worms. And anyway, it's going to be emotional and it's going to be problematic, but it's necessary work. And I fully agree that it's you know, moving to a K-5 is way better for the kids.
And, you know, the charge of a boundary committee is to make a recommendation to the superintendent, and then the superintendent approves or sends it back. And so we're a long way away from that right now, but
Right.
It truly is time to move forward, you know, on something like this. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that we've had the K235 model for a very, very long time, like
We have.
pre-World War II, right? Am I
Yeah.
right?
And it was before Mark Twain, it was Eugene Field, and that was K3, and Robert Frost was 4-6.
Yeah.
And we just recently transitioned to the K235, 6-8. So it's been around for a long time. I have employees at Robert Frost that went to school in our K235 situation.
I guess ultimately it's growing pains. That's what it is.
Yeah.
We are growing. People want to come and live here in this community. They want to raise their kids here. It's a special place. And we want to give them, you know, the best education that we can with that. And it physically is growing pains. So yeah, I guess that's what we can call it. They're never fun.
Well, and one of the things that we all have in common, or at least 99% of us in this country, is that we all had a public school experience, right? And so, and we get connected to that, especially if our kids are going through the same school system. So there is emotion tied to this type of thing, and so that's why having a clear, you know, an outside party coming in to assist with the boundary process is a wise choice. But I guess for what my ask of the board would be to take a look at this at your convenience, to think about it, and then if we could revisit this at the next board meeting, just so you can direct me in what your expectation is of me to move forward. I would
Just
really
to be
appreciate
clear,
it.
Scott, you're asking for an action item at the next board meeting.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Thanks for letting me share, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you, Leslie.
Yep. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Leslie. Okay. Well, next on the agenda is our OSBA training. This is with Sarah and Renee, who've joined us. Very appreciative for that. I don't entirely know which of you was going to present first, so I guess I will hand it over and let you guys kick off your portion tonight.
Good evening. Thank you for having Renee and I tonight to do the training with you. I see Irv has joined us. That's wonderful. So if I'm correct, I think we have all 7 board members with us tonight.
Indeed.
Great job. All right, so if you'll bear with me just for a second, I'm going to share my screen and Renee is going to kick us off.
So I hope it was appropriate that I jumped in on your chat there a little bit in your earlier part of your conversation. So I just wanted to let you know.
Of course.
It's a normal part of what we were going to talk about. Anyway, it's just, it's in the same slides for Dayton tomorrow night. So it was just there. So I just kind of wanted to let you know. So, so this is our second session with all of you for the transition plan, and we have an agenda of what we want. Oh, I didn't request control. There we go. Thanks, Sarah. For moving on. So we already discussed your superintendent evaluation and we discussed your expectations. Tonight, we're really going to drill down into your communication protocols, and a part of that is communicating about agenda. And then you have more time with us available if you would like more future sessions. We definitely need to cover the best practices and the roles and responsibilities for boards. And I know that I have done that with the Silver Fall board in the past and have worked with you, but we haven't ever had the conversations around that with Scott as your new superintendent. And so as a part of our transition plan, what we offer to boards is that we work with to help them in their search process for a new superintendent are up to 12 hours of additional board training. And some of it's required, soup eval, the expectations, communication protocols, and board best practices, our roles and responsibilities work. And then any time remaining, we can address other items. So when we come back, we'll dig more down into board best practices. But tonight, this is where we're going to focus our time is in communication protocols. Okay, Sarah. So just want to talk to you again about this concept of collaborative governance. I don't think, and I'm relying simply on memory here, that we've had a lot of conversation about this with your board in the past when I have done trainings with you. But it's basically a way that OSBA sees a highly effective form of governance is that the board brings other people to the table in your meeting. So it's in a full board meeting and you're bringing other people to the table with you in order to learn from those people, sort of like what you did tonight in your session about the school configurations. You brought other people into the room to learn with you. There needs to be an environment of trust or respect, or collaborative governance just doesn't work. And then that focus of why are you all working together in the first place? And that focus really should be one that's shared. And our belief about that is that it needs to be on those equitable student outcomes, that what you are governing for and why you are governing the Silver Falls school district in particular is because of students and what you want for them by being in your system. And then together, all of you share that responsibility. You share the accountability and you support one another. A lot of boards do this with a district-wide leadership team that helps them with collaborative governance. And in our understanding of a district leadership team, it's not just the usual suspects like the cabinet of the superintendent, but it's bringing in those other education professionals that perhaps are existing in your buildings, not in your central office, that can share from their expertise in whatever your shared focus is for those equitable student outcomes. So whatever it is that the district is working on in particular attention and focus for improvement in student outcomes and ensuring that that is an equitable process, that district leadership team includes those professionals throughout the entire system that are working together and then meet up with the board in a board meeting, and you have these kinds of discussions that are so rich and make your governance collaborative. And the first part that we really like to emphasize on that is the effective partnerships. So Sarah, if you change it. So when we're talking about effective partnerships, we're talking about the relationships within the board itself. So the relationships between the 7 of you and how you work together, your processes and meetings. I mean, I can very much appreciate that you want to talk about your meeting processes, and you should talk about your meeting processes in a work session and identify how are the 7 of you going to interact and work with one another. what is that effective partnership between the board and the superintendent? And that's what a lot of this transition program is about, is we want you and Scott to be able to work together, have that be effective, where you're really supporting this person that you hired so that he can be super successful, because you know, and I know you don't want to go through a search again anytime soon. You know, you found your guy and you want to be able to have the best kind of partnership relationship with him. And that's why we're going to be talking about your communication protocols, which is one aspect of that relationship. It's why previously we talked about the superintendent evaluation, because that's another very important part of your relationship with your superintendent and ensuring his effectiveness. If he doesn't get feedback from you, he can't know if he's meeting your expectations. And then lastly, that effective partnership with the board and the community. It's like, who are those players in your community? OSBA tends to call them key communicators. Who are those people that are paying a special attention to Silver Falls and want to partner with you on your work inside the district, and ensuring that you develop processes in order to integrate their voice into your board governance. And the board self-evaluation that you talked about, that you took with me last year, and if you want to take it again this year, it has specific questions about how the board communicates with the community. There's two ways of that communication. It's when you're pushing information out, like your minutes, for example, are a way that you communicate to the community about your meetings. The other was getting information in, and how does the board get information in from the community? And then there's also some questions in that survey evaluation as to how do you actually collaborate with the public. And I remember going over the results with all of you, but it's been a while ago and I don't remember when you last took that BSAS. But if it's, that's our internal acronym that we use, is Board Self-Assessment Survey. So we shorten it to BSAS. You might want to consider taking that again within a year or so of when you took it last year. But this little diagram shows this little snake thing that ties all of those big pieces together of collaborative governance. And so it's the partnerships, it's that shared focus, it's that collective responsibility that goes into organizational reliability. And that's where you have the mutual respect, trust, elevated board efficacy. So you definitely want to ensure and have those conversations that you were considering having tonight when you were trying to figure out about the agenda and where and all of that for those student outcomes. And then all of that happens in that engagement process, that other arrow that brings it back up, because this little snake thing doesn't terminate at organizational reliability. It actually goes right back up again to those effective partnerships. And it's really more of a cycle type of a process rather than a linear one that it almost looks like. And that engagement allows you to know if your goals are shared. It allows you to develop a language that you all have the same language, so that all of the different parts of the district, down into the buildings, out into the community, that you're all saying the same things because you've met together and you've discussed these things. And then the shared metrics. What are you using to pay attention to the things that you say truly matter? How are those things being measured? So this was a process that we wanted to be sure that the Silver Falls board knew and understood this collaborative governance, because even though you might be doing some of all these things, possibly, I don't know if you had a term for it, if you knew about it. I know we've done some workshops on it at our previous events pre-COVID, and we have some webinars on this, but we just wanted to be sure and bring it up at Silver Falls. So before I move on from this, to take yourself off mute and answer, because I can't see all of you simultaneously. So is this a new concept to Silver Falls, or is this something that you have been doing already?
I guess I'll chime in. I think it's clearly part of what we're doing already. I'm not sure we've specifically talked through this slide, if that's your question, but I do believe that broadly speaking, we follow certainly most of these guidelines.
Okay, okay, good to know. I don't watch all your board meetings, I'm gonna confess. I know that they've been recorded for time immemorial, all the time I've ever worked with you, but I don't watch them all. So, anybody else want to share about your perspective on collaborative governance, or are you happy to let Jonathan speak on behalf of the board?
Hi, Renee, this is Janet. I guess, and I'm, I've only been around for a year, so I don't have the depth, of experience that some of my other board members do. But I would say that we certainly aspire to this. I think I've seen this graphic before. I guess what I'd say is there might be a difference in how we do these things with regard to external issues and how we do them with regard to board governance issues. So for example, I think we do a fairly good job having a shared focus and an effective partnership in our decision-making with regard to what's happening out in the district. But I think with regard to our role as members and the appropriate role of the board and what we see as our mission and our purpose, I think we maybe don't have as much shared there. It's not because we don't want to. I think we all would like that. Sorry, dog. I think we struggle a little bit more with that.
Well, having a new superintendent in place can certainly help you establish some new practices that might not have worked as well as you would have liked in the past, or weren't as developed in the past as you would like to see moving forward. And we all know it's been a crazy year, and it's disrupted everything in public education. And so there's got to be a balance between what we recognize as positive, good, effective board governance practices and the reality of COVID not letting us gather and have the kind of shared partnerships with people that we would like to have, that when we can all get in a room together and have conversations. I mean, I'm glad we have this, but it's not ideal for bringing groups of people together. Anyone else? And then we'll move on. I don't want to beleaguer this, but I don't want to cut anybody out. It almost looked like Shelley at one point you were moving towards your button.
Yes, thank you, Renee. I want to echo Janet's point. I think we're not only going through a transition of having a brand new superintendent, and really want the best environment for him to be really successful. I heard that from every board member. I think just within ourselves, our collaborative group, I think there needs to be some work that needs to be done as far as really promoting best practices for communication, and things like that. So I don't know if we'll get into that later on, or if we're really focusing on how we can do better to help Scott, or if I see them as two separate things. Am I correct, or is that?
You're correct. And tonight's really about the communication between the board and the superintendent, because this is a part of the transition plan.
Right. Okay.
And the collaborative governance practices and functions within collaborative governance, which in part entails, like I talked about, the relationship within the board, and how the board communicates, isn't the primary focus for the transition plan. But it's certainly, that other thing that was on that agenda slide, we can certainly integrate some conversations around that in your other time that you have as a part of the transition program.
Right. And I think certain things that clearly that we do in a public meeting really would help Scott. have, like, for example, that other things, speaking that out so the whole board knows, and Scott and Dan, I think that's more of a healthy, productive, relationship. But anyway, I digress. Thank you.
Sure. Jennifer, did you want to say anything?
Yeah. The
Mike?
one thing that stood out to me was the community piece, like having those key community players that they're not board members, but they pay attention and they know the community. So finding ways to integrate those folks in, I think, is a great opportunity. And then I always like to go back to the bottom left-hand corner, the improved student outcomes bit. That's the part as a board member that I really want to focus on is those student outcomes and what can we do so that we are effective in creating those improved student outcomes.
Yeah. I would love to work with you on that. We'll see how much time we have in talking about that. Any other board members want to say anything? Okay, not seeing anything. Sarah, would you like to advance the slide? So kind of already talked about this, the effective partnerships within the board of superintendent, board community. So we can move on to the next slide. And I am going to hand it back over to Sarah, who's going to pick up here, and then you'll hear from me again later, or Sarah is also invited that I can jump in if I want to add something. So I'm going to mute myself at this point and hand this over to Sarah.
Thank you, Renee. All right, time for a quick review. Last time we went over elements of the board and superintendent operating agreement. As you can see here in the bottom section, communication has its own section on this first page of the board superintendent operating agreement. Following the chain of command, communicating directly with the superintendent or board chair prior to a meeting when there are questions on an agenda item. And we will go in specifically about meetings and agendas, etc. in a few more slides. We'll go in depth there and answer any questions anybody has. And then communicating one-on-one with the board and superintendent team as appropriate. On that second side of the board superintendent operating agreement are your expectations of each other. As you can see here, I've highlighted communication. It's embedded within so many parts of your expectations of each other. Clear expectations plus clear communication equals clear outcomes.
Okay.
So let's move into communication and begin by discussing the importance of communication. How you communicate is important. So board members, superintendent, I'm going to ask you individually, how do you describe effective communication? Not necessarily what's on this diagram here. This is really just an example, but I'd like you to come up with 2 to 3 qualities, words that come to mind that describe effective communication to you. And because we're doing this through Zoom, I'm just gonna kind of go down a list. I'm gonna call you off one at a time so you'll all have a chance to give your input. But if you could just share with all of us, how you define effective communication. So we'll start with Jonathan. He's just the first name on my list.
Okay, I was just jotting down a couple of notes. The first 2 words that I wrote down were pertinent and timely. So that's as far as I'd gotten with my thinking on it. But
No problem. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Jennifer.
One thing that I've been thinking about recently is just having timely responses to other communication. So communicating back in a timely manner.
Certainly. Great. Thank you. Shelley.
The only thing that I wrote down at the moment is you know, good communication promotes good teamwork.
Yeah.
That's all I have so far.
No problem. Thank you. Janet.
A little repetitive, but definitely prompt well before a decision has to be made, to give time to consider things. And then with context and background. So, you know, what are the data and what do we need to know in order to make really sound decisions?
Thank you. Lori?
Yes, I think that I would like to see more of a full body approach to information provided to each of the board members. So again, and it sounds almost like Janet's, but to really understand what you're making a decision on and understanding all the caveats to it, rather than learning about it after the fact. So.
Sure. Thank you. Irv?
Yeah, I guess some of this, how I would define effective communication would be through email, texting, or phone calling, but primarily texting and email. And to me, that's a whole body effect when it's addressed to the whole board. Everybody sees it at the same time. Well, if you look at it, but you get the same information.
Thank you, Irv. And Tom?
Yeah, there I am. Yeah, I would say just, you know, folks pretty summed it up pretty good, but I would say honesty and directness, and try to really distill your thoughts down quickly and try to cut to the chase as quickly as you can. You know, hopefully try not to muddy the water, but be really clear with what it is you're asking of the board or the superintendent.
Thank you. All right, great responses, everyone. Thank you for all sharing your thoughts there. Let's dive in.
Hey, Sarah, do you think we could hear from Scott how he defines communication?
Thank you, Renee. Absolutely, of course. Sorry about that, Scott.
No,
Please
that's
share with
fine.
us.
I've spent pretty much every single day for the past 21 days in sort of crisis communication mode.
Yeah.
And the two things that to me are the most important in crisis communication, number one is that it's truthful. And number two, there's a compelling reason for why I'm communicating that. So those are two of the big ones for me that I'm living in right now. But I would also add the word predictable, that the communication, the frequency of the communication, the way in which the superintendent communicates with each board member is predictable and consistent.
Great, thank you. All right. So always check the contract with the superintendent for anything related to communication. It's rare, but it does happen. So you certainly want to be aware if there's something in the contract about communication. We're going to look at some of your policies on communication. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a good start. And first, I just highly encourage all board members to read the entire A-B section of your policies. You don't have to be familiar with all the district's policies and the policy sections, but you should know this one. The first policy we're going to go into is BBAA, Individual Board Members' Authority and Responsibilities. Individual board members do not have any authority. Only the board as a whole has authority. This also applies to communication. Individual board members should not expect any special level of communication or information than any other community member would receive. And when you speak as an individual, you're very clear you are not speaking for the board. You are only speaking as yourself, an individual. In this policy, number 1 goes over requests for information. An individual board member can make a request for specific information to the superintendent, but that requested information should then be sent to the entire board. If the request is for something that will require a fair to significant amount of work to obtain, then the whole board should decide if they want the superintendent and his staff to pursue it. Let's put this on the agenda for the next meeting. Number 3 talks about receiving complaints. Complaints as a board member. We're going to go through this more specifically when we go through policy KL in a little bit. As you can see, number 4 highlighted here, this speaks to the board member's relationship to administration. When it comes to communication, individual board members cannot direct the superintendent or administration to any particular action. Remember, your authority is as a whole board, not an individual board member. Renee, do you have anything you want to add on this policy?
Yeah, this policy kind of really needs to be crosswalked with some of the other policies. For example, this board member to relationship to administration that talks about, says here that you may visit schools or other facilities to gain information required. You need to couple that with your policy BG, which is board staff communication, so that you are following what the board has set in that policy to know how board members may visit schools or other facilities to gain information. This isn't giving you carte blanche permission to just show up at a school anytime out of the blue and expect that the administration, the administrator at that building is going to drop whatever is on their schedule for the day to get you that information that you are requesting from that particular building. So just like Sarah talked about in the previous one about when you get complaints, you have to crosswalk that with KL. This particular one, you have to crosswalk with BG. And so it's just important to remember that as you're looking through any of these policies like this, there's often crosswalks to other policies. That's the only thing that I'd add there, Sarah. Unless any board members have any questions.
Yes, any questions from board members or Scott?
I have a question.
Sure.
Where does, when individual board members' authority and responsibilities, how does the board chair and the vice chair play into that?
Oh, such an excellent question, because you have a policy about board officers. So
We
that's
do.
that crosswalk thing again.
Yes, I think there's like 5 crosswalks.
Yeah, there's quite a few intersections because by policy, you have given the chair certain responsibilities that don't fall to other members of the board. And then the vice chair is defined in there as well. So you would have to, for that particular answer, you'd have to look at that one. And sorry, Sarah, if you're going to answer that. I'm just so used to doing these solo.
You're totally fine, Renee. I appreciate you popping in. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Like Renee said earlier, we can only see a couple faces at a time. So if you raise your hand, I might not see it. Feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt if need be. All right. So policy BBF. Board member standards of conduct. This policy lays out what board members should do. Everything listed in this policy is important, and there is a lot listed here. I'm only going to highlight a few. Numbers 2 and 3 relate to communication, and number 3 again reinforces the notion that individual board members do not have any power or authority. And with number 4, there will be different perspectives on the board. It's important to listen to one another. Number 7, we'll go over this as well when we review policy KL. It speaks to your expectations of one another and the chain of command. And it is one of Scott's expectations of the board to follow the chain of command of the school district. Number 16 connects to communication. If there is an individual criticism regarding what is going on in the district, as an individual, you would take it to the superintendent, not the staff. You would be taking it as a community member or a parent, not as a board member. And this is because you do not have any special standing or authority as an individual board member, right? Only as a whole board. Numbers 20 and 21 are regarding social media. Use these communication pathways judiciously and respectfully while maintaining confidentiality. Social media is a growing concern for boards and individual board members. As board members, you are bound by these board policies. This policy reinforces that more than 2 board members responding to an email or social media post can constitute an illegal board meeting if the subject matter is board business.
Sarah, I have a question about that.
Please.
So if there is a message that comes from an individual board member and 2 other board members are addressed, or excuse me, 3 other board members are addressed on it, is that a meeting?
All right, let me make sure I'm tracking the math there.
So
one
4, there would be 4 people in
Yes.
on that.
Then that's a public meeting violation.
Okay, and so what about 3?
My instinct is that may not be a public meeting violation, but it's not a good idea. Renee?
Yeah, so if it's not a technical violation, it's certainly a spirit of the law violation, because public meeting law is pretty clear that board members all should have the same information by which to make decisions or to deliberate towards decisions. And if even 2 board members are getting together to discuss, hey, what do you think about this uniform policy idea? And they go on to say, I really think we should have uniforms for every kid. It'll identify them as all students and blah, 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 and whatever their rationale is. And then the other board member says, well, I don't know. Why do you think that that's so important? I've read the literature on student uniforms, and I don't see that it's really, can have that much of a difference on student performance. And remember, we're all about student outcomes, not necessarily all of the individual little inputs like uniforms. So it may not be a violation of the public meeting law specifically because it did not include a quorum, but it was information that would be used by deliberation. And so those 2 people that are having that conversation really should be having that conversation at the board meeting so all the other board members can hear their beliefs, their rationale, their decisions. And so OSBA recommends that you not have conversations outside of board meetings on anything that is board business that falls under your domain to make decisions about. It's different if you're parents and you're talking about, hey, did you go to the musical at that school? I'm still talking old pre-pandemic world, but did you go to that musical? Did you see it? Man, those kids were so cute, and when that little girl pulled the microphone apart, wasn't that funny? But she handled it so well. The music teacher came back up and put the microphone back together for her. That's not board business. It's not like you can't ever talk about schools, but you have to be able to distinguish what's actually board work and what's not, and keep the board work conversations at the board meeting to fully respect Oregon's public meeting laws. In addition, tonight we're going to talk about your policy.
Renee?
Just a second. We're going to talk about your policy BD/BDA, which does delineate what kind of communications you can have with each other outside of board meetings, including electronic communications. Yes.
So is there a difference between procedural conversations and conversations about things that are on the agenda?
Yes, there are. So your policy, when we get to it on policy BD/BDA, when we get to that policy and it defines the kind of communications you can have with each other outside of board meetings, one of those is kind of that availability for meetings, you know, who's going to show up, you know, are you ordering dinner, who wants what things for dinner, and stuff we refer to as housekeeping. Those kind of conversations are fine, but when you are wanting to discuss rationale for something that is on the agenda, then that conversation you should have according to policy and discuss inside of a meeting.
That's right.
Any of the items that are on your agenda to discuss, yeah, those you do in a meeting. Did that help, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think so. And so if, say you receive, because this recently happened to me, say you receive a message that is asking for information, and it's got 4 board members can have access to this email, what should you do? Not respond?
You could do a reply all and say, hey, we're violating public meeting law. Let's stop this right now. If you have, and once we get done tonight, since all 7 of you are on this, you're going to know what your policies say about how to place items on an agenda. Or that, you know, there's a couple of routes for board members to take to place items on an agenda. So if you're on a email like that you believe is morphing into topics that shouldn't be discussed, basically behind closed doors, because people can't see your emails, you know, unless they request them, but they don't necessarily even know they're there to request them. They can't see them. So if you believe something is morphing into a violation of public meeting law, then just shut it down and remove yourself from it.
Thank you.
Renee, I have a couple questions. Presuppose that board members are also community members and parents. So when does that, when do we wear a different hat? Presuppose, hypothetically, I'm talking about, we're going to be doing uniforms. Are you kidding me? I hate the color brown. I have to wear that? My poor child, you know, has, you know, so I'm expressing my personal opinion as a parent. No, I don't want uniforms. I certainly don't want them in that color. And let's say that there were a couple other board members in a group. How, I mean, do I not have the ability as a parent to say, this is my opinion?
Well,
I'm not crazy about it, but even, and let's say I'm a board member at the same time.
Right. No, I totally get what you're saying, Lori. And Sarah addressed it a little bit earlier in, I think it was item number 7, that as a board member, you have the right to express your public opinion, and just making sure people know it's your public opinion. No, it wasn't number 7. It must have been earlier. There it is, number 4. And so if you're in a group of people and it's been on your agenda that you guys are going to discuss uniforms, and some other parent comes up to you in the grocery store or wherever and says, really, Lori, you guys are thinking about uniforms?
Yeah.
You know, what's up with that? And then you can always, as a board member, explain what's on upcoming agendas, what took place at previous meetings. So you're never restricted from talking about that part of board action, you know, with people. And you can say, yeah, I know we're talking about these uniform things, and, you know, as a parent, my kid looks terrible in brown, so
yeah,
you know, I'm not crazy about it.
Right.
Now, if other board members show up, just have to really be on your guard to refrain from debating the merits of uniforms out in the public with other board members, and especially with, you know, anybody from the public hearing you debate these merits about uniforms or what you hate about the idea of uniforms. Because you're supposed to try and influence your fellow board members to the right kind of a vote by sharing all of that with all of the board members at the same time.
Okay.
So I also have a question related to this. I had taken of late to sending out an email to the board reminding them of the upcoming meeting the following week and outlining the draft agenda, what's on it. And I usually put a why, some little bit of context as to why the agenda looks like it does. Is that, it's mostly context, is that acceptable, or are we talking, you know, still a little too much and they just see the agenda get posted just like everybody else and then that's that?
Well, I mean, I think that merits some conversation because it gets back to what, I'm going down this list here, what Janet talked about the communications, including context and background, what Lori talked about in, you know, having all of that information, especially before board decisions are made, so that the additional information doesn't come up after a board meeting, you know, when the decisions are made. And Irv got to it as well, you know, sending those communications to the whole board at the same time. He believes that lends its way to that full body approach that Lori was talking about. I think it's fine that you can say, so for the month of October, we're going to be talking about these things. These are the items that are on our agenda, and you'll be getting a full packet on this, you know, in due time with more detailed information. But if you're wondering why we're talking about such and such, well, it's on OSBA's calendar key events that October's the month to talk about these things. And so we're going to talk about them because that's what's been recommended. That's the month to do that. So you could provide a little context like that. I don't think that is deliberating towards a decision. That is ensuring that all board members have the same information. And since the packet email is not the packet itself, but that agenda email that you just talked about is going to all board members and you're not deliberating about it, you're just providing context. Here's our agenda, here's the reasons why these are on our agenda.
Perfect.
It doesn't violate the public meeting law. And it's a discoverable email if anybody wanted to see it. You know, it's public.
I have my hand raised. Does anybody see that, or do we know?
I can't see it, but that's okay, Shelley, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just want to make, you know, everybody has something to say, so I just wanted to raise my hand to go next. So in those emails, when there are emails sent, there really shouldn't be any personal opinions in those emails, correct?
Well,
those should be brought to the board as a whole in public to discuss as best practice.
Yeah, we're going to talk about your policy BD/BDA, which has communications outside of board meetings, and we don't have it in front of you, so it's a little hard to do that. So we're going to get to that. Purpose of the email certainly dictates how the email is used. I mean, you know, what's the purpose? Why am I sending this communication to anybody in the first place? And so certainly need to consider that, and then you need to consider who the recipients should be, and your policy pretty much delineates how you should communicate about agenda items, and you have your communication agreements that are already in your operating agreement with your superintendent. So you already have that spelled out for you. And so it's hard to just say yes or no to your why question about, you know, whether the email should include why, because it really gets back to the whole purpose of why you're sending an email in the first place and who the recipient is. So.
Okay, I'm sorry, Shelley.
That's okay.
My brain just started running with a question. Renee, let me know when I can ask you a question about an email I sent and the number of board members that can be informed. I'll just leave it at that so I don't take up any more time.
Yeah, as far as contacting OSBA, any individual board members can contact OSBA at any time. So you can email Sarah or me or whomever else at OSBA you would like. I would caution you to just have that email be from yourself to the person at OSBA. And all the staff know the right ways to do things, so they will respond appropriately. So Lori, any questions you have for me, if you aren't able to bring them up in this meeting tonight, if you feel like that they're not directly tied to this, you can certainly email me tomorrow or tonight when the meeting ends.
Okay, very good.
We can talk about it.
Good.
Shelley, did you have anything else, Shelley, that you wanted to comment or ask about?
I don't think for this particular policy, but maybe another policy, just some practices that that have been implemented that I think we need to discuss as far as, connecting with our policies and what that means. So just more clarification, I think,
Sure.
later. So yeah, thanks for asking.
No problem. Anybody else have any questions about this policy before we move on?
I just had a follow up to Renee's. One of the things that I just read recently was that it's the board chair's role to solicit legal advice. So that might be a caveat to what you said about any board member can reach out to OSBA, maybe not for legal advice.
Yeah,
No.
legal advice is definitely different. And your policy has given, it has stipulated in this particular policy before here, the BBAA policy is the one that addressed requests for legal advice. And it particularly states that if it's tied to the superintendent's contract, that goes through the board chair. Go up one, Sarah. So request for legal opinion, number 2. So a request for a legal opinion by any board member must first be approved by the board. So if one board member wants to just reach out to some attorney and ask for some advice on the board, they shouldn't do that unless they have approval of the board to do that. If the legal opinion sought involves the superintendent's employment or performance, that request needs to go through the chair. So it would be the chair that would reach out if there was questions in particular about the superintendent's employment, their contract, or any of those kinds of things. Any other board member that wants a legal opinion needs to bring to the board and say, well, I think we need a legal opinion on this. I mean, is it even legal to ask kids to wear uniforms? Is that even something that we can place upon families, and enforce a uniform policy? Is that even legal? And then the board would decide, yeah, we should probably get a legal opinion on that. And then you would vote on it. And if the board wants it, then board member assigned would then reach out to OSBA or any other attorney to seek out that legal opinion. Does that help clarify that?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
I had one more follow up to that, to actually this topic, talking about legal. We did have an attorney come from OSBA to speak with our board about communication. And she said, I think it was Haley Purcell, I think that's her name. She came and specifically said, if you want to have communication, make a phone call or talk about it at a public meeting. Emails, texts, social media, any of that electronics, in particular electronics communication is not best practice. Best practice is to make a phone call or talk about it at your public meeting.
Yeah.
And I specifically remember her saying that. So
Yeah.
is that still the case?
Sorry, I thought you were finished.
That's okay.
That aligns with your policy. So what Haley told you is also what is in your policy BDA item number 2 on communications outside of board meetings. And the first part of that policy just basically states what Sarah showed you in the first part of this policy, is that as an individual board member, you have no authority unless you are in a meeting. It takes the affirmative vote for anything to happen. And you have to vote in meetings. And so, they weave together your different policies. But I haven't seen where they contradict each other. Now, I did see that when I very first started working with you guys, way back when I think only Irv was on the board at that time, maybe also Tom, when I said, you know, you have this policy that says this and you have this policy that says that, and they're in direct conflict with one another. And so then that's when you guys hired OSBA to do a policy update. So I don't think you have any policies that contradicted each other anymore, like you did several years ago.
All right. Any other questions or comments on policy BBAA? All right. Now it's 7 o'clock and your meeting started roughly at 5. Do you want to take a quick break?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it'd be a good idea.
All right. You want to do 5 minutes or 10 minutes?
10, please.
Okay. So let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 7:10.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're all here and we can resume our meeting. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Jonathan. Before I jump back in, I just wanted to confirm. So I believe we started about 20 minutes after 6. Do we get to go then to 8:20 or do we need to have a hard stop at 8 p.m.?
Let's see where it lands. I think we had booked you for 2 hours and we'll give you approximately that much anyway.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you. All right, policy BG, board staff communications. Essentially, official board business comes through the superintendent. This means all official communication to or from staff flows from the superintendent. Boards can talk to community members and staff members, but it's through the same channels as anybody else. One-on-one conversations with board members, public comment, requests to be on the agenda, etc. And here we talked about visits to school already, but let's go over that one more time. Board members can visit schools as board members, but only under board authorization. And this is different than visiting as a parent. When board members do visit schools, it's not to evaluate or inspect. It's to gain knowledge, as in informal expressions of interest, not supervisory. So what has been past practice here in Silver Falls during non-COVID times? What has been the process for school visits while in the role as a board member, not as a parent?
Are you asking that of us?
I am.
I thought it was hypothetical. I can answer that. I'd like to try.
Sure.
In the past, we have let our superintendent know, or the superintendent actually invites us sometimes to go on tours if that's what that person feels like doing. But we just, are supposed to let them know that we're going to the school for some reason or another. And it usually just goes through him or her, but in the past it has been through the superintendent. You just let them know or, give them a heads up and, have that communication flowing there. So that way they're aware.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, Sarah. I would just say, yeah, that was correct what Shelley said. In the years past, we would call our superintendent, and then he would call the principal of the school and ask if it would be okay, depending on what their schedule was for the day. And then the superintendent would be in communication with us and say, yeah, that's fine to go at this time. And
Perfect. Thank you. Renee, did you have anything you wanted to add to this policy before we move on?
Thanks, Sarah. I think what this section of your policy is intended to accomplish is that there's just not a surprise that you just not as a parent or a grandparent or whatever, but just as a parent, you're just, as a board member, you're not just dropping into schools And so process really needs to be what works in your community. And when it says visits by board members will be conducted with the full knowledge of staff, including the superintendent, principals, and other visitors, it doesn't necessarily say how full, how the staff, principals, and other supervisors are going to find out about that visit. And so contacting your superintendent absolutely is a must if it's, you want to go visit a school simply because you are a board member. And so if you need to have further deliberations on process, you certainly can have it, but this policy doesn't necessarily get to the process. I'm always reminded of a time when I served on my board, and I don't know, I apologize if I've shared this with you before, Silver Falls, but we were hearing a presentation about a new curriculum adoption for the whole district. And one of our schools was asking to opt out of that curriculum adoption, came specifically to a board meeting, had a representative there, and was asking for dispensation because they felt that the way that they were teaching this particular topic was better their way than this new adoption that we were considering. And so, I mean, I was at the board meeting and I'm saying, I don't really understand this process that you're talking about. Could I go see it in action? And, I looked at the superintendent, obviously there at our board meeting, and saying, can I go see this? And he said, absolutely. And so the superintendent's office set it all up so that when I arrived at the school, because I wanted to see this process, they knew I was coming. The secretary greeted me. She took me into the room where the teacher had agreed to allow me to observe a lesson in this particular process that they were using. And then after I watched the lesson, the kids were excused to recess or PE or something, but left the classroom. And so then the teacher sat down and talked with me one-on-one. And I did that visit because I was a board member, but it was all arranged. And I didn't just show up at that school and say, hey, I want to see this stuff. That would have been a violation of our policy. So I think it's getting at the spirit of that when we talk about visiting schools.
Thanks, Renee. Yeah, it sounds like you guys are doing great there. So we will move into BDDC, board meeting agenda. Oh boy, okay. All board members need to know how to get something on the agenda. It is the board as a whole, not the board chair and superintendent, that controls the agenda. However, many times this happens through the superintendent. The superintendent prepares the agenda along with the board chair, as is this policy, as per this policy. Anyone can make a request to add something to the agenda. Then it's up to the superintendent and board chair to draft the agenda. The board as a whole should adopt the agenda, own the agenda, and can modify the agenda if they need or want to. But to avoid surprises in a meeting and per this policy, items of business may be suggested by notifying the superintendent at least 5 days prior to the meeting. When there are questions about the board packets, what do? Do you ask them in the moment, in the meeting? Try to raise those questions before the board meeting. So again, there are no surprises. It's about setting the superintendent up for success and giving them the time to get that information for you. Asking in advance gives Scott the opportunity to provide you with the answer during the meeting. So it's about 1, avoiding surprises, and 2, allowing the board to get the information it needs to proceed with board business. Because Scott believes he's already given you what you need in your packets. He won't know that you need more information unless you ask ahead of time. The policy also states that the agenda and board packet will be available and distributed to all board members at least 2 working days prior to the board meeting. All right, so those are some highlights out of this policy. And I know there's several questions around board meeting agenda. So let's talk about that. Let's dive in there. Tell Renee and me a little bit about how you build the agenda now, what your current process is, and what your questions are.
I can start with how we build it now. So I think Scott and I both bring what I'll call a backlog of things that may have been suggested in the week and or maybe even as much as months before, depending on, you know, the list. And we discuss the merits of those items and formulate an agenda that we think makes sense and is timely and pertinent to address the pressing needs of the district. So that is how we've set this up. We solicit input from the assistant superintendent and the vice chair on the board to make sure we're not missing anything. And we then publish the agenda. The recent change that seems to be causing some concern is that we added to the very beginning of the agenda, the adoption of the agenda. And that was done solely for the purpose of making it, I guess, more accessible and to make sure people felt like the board as a whole owned it, like you were saying, and not just the chair and the superintendent. So that was the reason for that change. It seems to have generated some concern. And so I want to make sure we address that concern tonight.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, best practice is to have the board as a whole, like I said, own that agenda, adopt it. And if there's something that you would like added to the agenda during the board meeting or at the beginning of the board meeting, it is perfectly fine to make a motion asking to amend the agenda to add whatever item. Your policy states that you know, items of business may be suggested. So it's not so much per policy that they have to. It's probably, you know, if you have the ability to do it ahead of time, absolutely do it ahead of time. But sometimes things come up and, you know, in the moment in the meeting, you want to add an agenda item, and that's okay. You make a motion. If it's seconded, you know, you can move forward to a vote. If it gets voted to be added on, then you add it on, which is something that you did earlier in this meeting. And so, you know, I think it's great that you guys are moving toward adopting the agenda at the beginning of the meeting and giving everyone an opportunity to, you know, own it as a board. Renee, do you want to jump in?
Well, I'll just say that, you know, you've had the ability to do what this new practice is all along. You just weren't doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And so that's one of the benefits of learning. And so when the webinar that was on effective meetings, primarily geared towards board chairs, but as I stated in the chat, anybody can watch that webinar. It was just kind of to help current board chairs and vice chairs understand what was at their disposal. But your third item, your third statement on here, items of business not on the agenda may be discussed and acted upon if a majority of the board agrees to consider them. Well, when would you do that as a matter of course? And the best time to do that is at the beginning of the meeting. And so now you have instituted this practice. You're going to be making it part of your how we do things around here in Silver Falls, is that at the beginning of the meeting we have this agenda and we can approve it as is, or we can propose an amendment to the agenda. I move that we amend the agenda and add the discussion of student uniforms to tonight's agenda. Now, if that gets a second and if it gets voted on, then it gets added to the agenda. If it doesn't get a second, it doesn't even get discussed. And all a second doesn't imply agreement. all a second is saying is, yeah, I think I want to discuss that, whatever that is. So once
So Renee, is that enough? Is
No.
that enough? Oh, it isn't. You have to still have a majority.
Yes.
Well, now you can discuss it because it was seconded. So somebody just making a motion. So for example, Lori, with your very first amendment to the agenda tonight, if nobody had seconded that, it would have just died.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody seconded. But the fact that it got seconded, Jonathan opened it up for discussion. And so then the board was discussing all of the merits of that motion and trying to more fully understand what you were asking for in the motion. And, you know, Shelley was offering clarifications as she saw it. And you guys were having a discussion about whether you wanted to amend the agenda to, you know, add what you had asked for, Lori. And then that motion failed because it couldn't garner a majority. So then Shelley made another motion. She tried to narrow it down and get more specific about it. If nobody had seconded that, it would have died as well, but it was seconded. So there was a little bit more discussion. The one thing that you guys kind of erred on is that you wanted to retract a motion. That's not, you don't get to do that. The board has to, it's now out there in the purview of the entire board and you got to vote on it. And if you changed your mind about it, you could vote no, and then it doesn't go anywhere rather than retracting, because retracting isn't really a thing.
Okay.
And then, you know, that would have been now 2 amendments to the agenda that would have failed. And then you finally figured out the motion you really wanted to make was to ensure that Sarah and Renee talked about this tonight, you know, in the training, which, as you can see from these slides, we didn't add these in the break. It was already intended to be talked about tonight. You didn't know that because you didn't see our slides, you know, communication protocols. And so anyway, then there was a third motion. And it all of that relates back to this third statement of items of business not on the agenda may be discussed and acted upon if a majority of the board agrees to consider them. I had a situation when I was board chair, and we had a new superintendent in our district, not like Scott, you know, new to our district, didn't really know anything about our district. And he and I would get together for coffee every Monday morning in a very public place that was near the high school. And lots of high school teachers would come pop in and they'd see us there. And it was just an opportunity to support the superintendent, help bounce things off of, you know, he could bounce things off of me because he was still learning the district. And then we would include the vice chair on the week when we were discussing preparing the agenda. And we would have those conversations. Superintendent would bring his list, just like Jonathan described, and I'd have mine. And we would discuss what items get placed on the agenda. And then we would go through a process similar to yours of sending out the packet and all that kind of stuff. I got a phone call from the superintendent one day because a board member was following the first part of this statement up here. Items of business may be suggested by any board member, staff member, student, citizen of the district, notifying the superintendent at least 5 working days prior to the meeting. This other board member contacted the superintendent. We sent our packets out 5 working days before our meeting, not 2 like you guys. So the packet had already gone out. This board member asked to add an agenda item. The new superintendent said, sure, fine, yeah, we can add that to the agenda. And then he calls me and I'm like, no, we are not putting that on the agenda. It's not happening. And unfortunately, the superintendent had to kind of humble himself and inform that board member that it's not getting placed on the agenda. That board member could have made a motion at the start of our meeting because we always adopted our agendas like we're advising you to do. This board member could have made a motion to add that item. And if it had gotten the majority of the board agreeing to consider that, I would have been overruled as the board chair on what was in the agenda. He didn't do that. We addressed his concerns in another fashion, another way. And the reason it didn't get put on the agenda is because it had absolutely nothing to do with board work. He wanted to use his position as an individual board member to use the board forum to be as his bully pulpit. And
No.
I wasn't going to consent to that. He had a personal issue and it wasn't board business. And I'm like, no, this isn't board work. So we're not going to do it. And if he had made a motion and it got seconded as a board chair, I would have said that. This is not board work. This is why it didn't get added in the first place. You know, and would have pointed that out, but he saved himself the embarrassment and didn't bring it up in a board meeting.
Renee, I have a follow-up on the issue that happened at the beginning of our meeting. I also caught that retract business. I thought that there were two kind of options: one, to vote and let it die, or do an amendment to the amendment. But that seems really complicated. So, but would either of those have worked?
Well, yes, but technically the motion wasn't an amendment. The motion was a motion. It was just worded as amending the agenda.
Okay.
So it was just a singular motion, but you guys didn't quite state it that way. So when Shelley made the motion, she didn't say, I move that we add an agenda item. She said, I move, well, she didn't even say the I move part, but she said, you know, I want to make an amendment, or I propose an amendment to the agenda. So the motion itself, yes, it could have been voted the way it was stated. And if, you know, if everybody voted no, that would have been fine. Or it could have been amended by any member. Shelley, as a motion maker, could have made a proposal, and then you have to vote on whether or not to amend the first motion. And then if it's amended, then you vote on it as amended. And so you have two votes that happen there. So amending motions gets really complicated, and it's just easier if you just like vote no on that one because you've changed your minds and propose a new motion. It's cleaner that way. Lori?
Yeah, I have a question. My situation was that my interpretation currently as a board member is that when a board member, say myself, that doesn't hold any position, says, you know, I would like to talk about this new way in which we do the meetings. I would like that as an agenda item. And so I present that in a timely manner to the right people, and then it doesn't show up on the agenda, or something comes up and it can't. Okay, let's presuppose the 4 people that are currently making the decision about the agenda decide that, you know, we're not going to put this on the agenda, but you have a second opportunity to amend. Is it my understanding that if I get turned down the first time, I can possibly offer an amendment, I guess, at the beginning of the meeting to see if there's enough people interested in supporting that? And then if it dies, well, that's the end of that. Because really, just because I offer an agenda item doesn't mean it's going to be acknowledged. Correct?
So according to your policy, Lori, if you want to place something on an agenda, you need to get that to Scott 5 working days prior to the meeting. So, and then at that point, Scott would communicate that back to the current chair, which is Jonathan, and say, I got a request to add this to the agenda. And then they would discuss whether there was time to include that item from any board member, whether it was timely, whether it would be better suited in another meeting, and so on and so forth. And they would have their conversation. And then ideally, Scott would call you back and tell you the result of that. You know, hey, we were able to add it to the agenda. Thanks for suggesting that. Or we discussed it. We believe it needs to go on another agenda in the future. Or in this particular instance, talking about meeting process, a work session is really the best place to have those kinds of discussions. And so might suggest adding it to a certain date's work session. Or he could just tell you flat out that they don't recognize that as board business. Now, talking about your process is definitely your board business, but if it was something else, he could say, like in my example that I gave, that's not really board work. It was determined that we're not going to take it up in a meeting. And so Scott would get back to you with the follow-up. So you wouldn't show up at the meeting and not know what the response to your request was. But you always have in your back pocket this third statement in here that items of business that are not on the agenda may be discussed and acted upon if a majority of the board agrees to consider them. Does that help, Lori?
Sort of. It sort of does. I feel like sometimes when it comes to agenda items, we're pretty bumpy on the process. And as it stands right now, there seems to be a 4 that work together on it. And then of course we have the opportunity to amend. I'm not sure, sometimes it feels like you're at the prom and you're asking people to dance with you. And if your first choice doesn't dance with you, then you have this other opportunity to see if you can find a partner to dance with. I don't know. As a board member, sometimes I feel like most of the time things get either, I guess maybe the agenda items that I mentioned in the past just weren't important enough. I don't know. It would be nice to know why it wasn't considered. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I don't think it's right just to say, no, we're not going to do it, or surprise, there's your agenda. And what I asked wasn't there and the reason why. That's been bothering me quite a bit. It's still going on and I hope we can resolve it as a board.
So Scott, you know, you were nodding your head through some of this, and this definitely involves you by policy here. I'm curious what your practice has been, or if you're willing to adopt the practice that says, I'll take your request, we'll discuss it, and I'll give you an answer. Can you speak to any of this, Scott?
Yeah, I'm totally okay with that process. I would support that 100%. You know, part of this is me learning too. And, you know, I've been a superintendent for 3 months. So if we want to, you know, implement something like that, I'm all for it. And Laura, you and I have talked before as well.
Oh, yeah. And Scott, this isn't about what we discussed, because you were very clear with what I needed to do, and I did that. But I still feel like when I'm taking all the right steps, it's still being not considered. And after a while, as a board member, you start to feel pretty depleted of your voice and why you're on the board to begin with. And so I am speaking very passionately about it because I've really hit my limit with what's been going on. And I think this board needs to work it out and be respectful of each other and figure out a good way to be clear, instead of saying, well, we just didn't put it on the agenda, we didn't think it was good enough, or it didn't work. And that's not your fault, Scott. It's what has been put in place in the past, and I think we really need to iron it out. But that's it. I'll stop right there. I think otherwise I'll just sound like a repeat and rinse. So I'll stop with that.
One thing that is, as I went through the policies today before I came, one thing that was really clear to me is that in the past, we had a working agreement, not with the last superintendent, but the superintendent before that, that said to submit your agenda items to either the chair or the superintendent. But our policy really says it's the superintendent. So that's who you should submit your agenda items to. And the one thing I'm noticing too about our policy is that it says 5 days in advance of the meeting, but it doesn't say 5 working days, but that's what we've been asking. We've been asking for those to happen on Monday, the Monday before the Monday meeting to get.
Well, it does say 5 working days, Jennifer.
Oh, it does. I thought I read 2 or 5. Oh, yes, it does. Okay. All right. Never mind. Monday then.
Yeah. Jonathan, can I break in? And that's for clarification. This is Tom here. Yeah. Hey, I maybe I misheard, but Lori, can I ask for a clarification? Did you did you say that there were 4 board members working together? Did I mishear that?
Oh, no, not board members. I think what we have currently in process is that the chair and vice chair work with the assistant superintendent and the superintendent on the agenda, not 4 board members, but it takes 4 board members, I think, when there is a motion. I mean, you have to have majority, otherwise it will fail.
Okay,
Which
good. I just wanted to
Yeah, and which is
Yeah,
what
no.
happened,
Thank you.
which is what happened earlier in the meeting. Does that clarify it, Tom?
Yeah, there's 4.
Oh, good.
Yeah, those, the chair, not the 4.
Oh, no.
I think it clarifies it. Okay. Yeah, good.
Okay.
You understand my question. Thank you so much for clarifying that.
You bet. No problem.
Okay, you bet. Thanks, Lori.
You bet. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I like the idea of approving the agenda as a board beforehand. I think, though, unless we recognize some of the issues that maybe Lori has had and work on improving that end of the process, we're going to find that there are too many amendments that happen on the day of. And I think that's not ideal, right? You don't want to start cramming new things into what is usually a full agenda. And particularly if there are things where you haven't had any meeting packet materials, you don't really know the background, you're not sure why you're discussing it because it's come out of the blue. So I definitely think it's a useful thing to have, and it's important because it allows for a board member to say, hey, I feel like this is important. I want to see if it's important to everyone else.
Right.
So I think we really absolutely should protect that, but we do need to do a better job in our more formal way of establishing the agenda so that we don't end up burdening this piece of it and ending up with all of these last minute additions. It seems to me anyway.
So, Janet, do you think that the idea of amending or a proposed, amended, or an approved agenda was out of the blue?
Wait, you mean Lori's motion or Shelley's motion today?
I mean that you just talked about hypothetically about things being put on agendas out of the blue.
Right.
And I wondered if you thought that the approval of the agenda was out of the blue, or having that process was out of the blue.
Well, that is just as a relatively new board member, that in particular did take me by surprise, just because I didn't know that we had ever talked about it or considered it, or that it was not a practice we had engaged in previously. I mean, to Renee's point, we've always had that ability, but now we've formalized it. So I did not realize until that was announced a few weeks ago, I think, that we were going to engage in this practice from now on. So yeah, that was a surprise.
So he did email on 8/15 that was something that was he wanted to try. And then he sent an email reminder on the 21st, and on the 24th, he explained it at the beginning of the meeting. And there was more follow-up on that. So I guess, I don't know how much, there was lots on there. And I think that since Scott has taken the helm, and Jonathan has been sending his weekly updates, that he's done a good job of telling us why things are on the agenda. So I guess what I'm wondering is what feels out of the blue.
No, so let me clarify. It wasn't out of the blue that we were doing it this evening. When it first came up, I had to sort of play a little catch up. What my comment about out of the blue was that if suddenly I decided to say, I want to talk about school uniforms tonight, to use Renee's example, that could be difficult to have a really good conversation about, because it, for the rest of the board, has come out of the blue and no one knows why maybe we are talking about school uniforms and where's the data and do we have any attachments. I'm saying, while I think this is a really valuable tool to have, because it is very democratic and it allows people to bring things forward, I don't want us to abuse it to the point where we start throwing things at each other at the last minute because we don't feel like we have a way to do that in a more formal way as the agenda is being set initially. So to speak to some of Lori's frustrations, if she's continually feeling like there's not a good mechanism for her to
Right.
be able to contribute to the formal agenda, then we're going to find that this mechanism takes the burden of that.
I totally get that, and I would hope that we would not vote to talk about something that needed more board packet kind of information. So I think that's where the safety valve is. But I agree with you totally. I guess I don't understand the piece that Lori's talking about because I haven't been privy to all of that. And so, but in terms of, well, I'll just leave it there.
I would like to respond. I think what I would have liked to have seen, it sounds like the chair and the vice chair had an opportunity to go to a webinar and they shared the link and a description to the whole board. The word, we would like to try this. What does try mean? Does try mean 3 months? Does try mean 6 weeks? Does try mean, and then bring it back to the board and say, how does this feel to the board as a whole? Is it effective? Is it efficient? And that's what I was hoping to do, was just to have that discussion. And for some reason, to get it on the agenda, or maybe I don't clarify myself with the clarity needed to be understood, seems to be where I'm terribly frustrated. I don't mind trying new things. It's just that I think it should go back to the board for discussion and say, how does this feel, folks? Did you like amending, having the ability to amend? Did you like the ability to have a speaking chart? How does that work for you? Are there other things we need to discuss? That's where my concern, I wanted to bring it back to the board for discussion because I felt that was the fair and thing to do after we try something. The trying didn't bother me. It was, when will it come back to the board for discussion? And I think that's where the cloudiness has been, and it's been a little bit awkward. So I just wanted to say that.
So if I may, there's a couple of things in play here. The first is the agenda itself, to which this adoption of the agenda is an agenda item. That piece, I mean, there's a chicken and egg problem, right? I mean, at some point, it is per policy, the board and chair and superintendent who put the agenda together. So we felt that was a good thing to do. It followed our own policy. It was opening an avenue that technically always existed, but we were formalizing it. I guess we didn't anticipate pushback. So that's why we went ahead and added it. Now, other items, such as implementing a formal talking chart or discussing, well, we have an item even tonight on the board working agreement conversation. Those kind of things are going to come up as agenda items for discussion before we would ever choose to implement formal process changes. I think they're wholly different categories of change. And, you know, I guess I'm caught off guard by the fact that this is creating so much consternation within the board. And then the last thing I'll say, because it relates, Lori, to what you've been talking about a bit ago, is that, well, two things. Number one, when you do make a request, it does need to be specific with enough context so that the superintendent and chair can appreciate and understand and discuss whether it makes sense for the agenda. The other thing is that not all requests are going to make it, and you are and have in the past been given an explanation as to why they didn't. I know I've personally given you that explanation on several occasions. There just are topics that aren't board business that occurred with our previous superintendent, and it's occurred with this superintendent. So we need to be cognizant that not everything you want to talk about is going to make the agenda, right? So there's that.
Right. Well, okay. Then what it happens then when you say, well, anybody, let me know if you'd like anything on the agenda, I'd be glad to hear from you. After being pushed back a couple times as an individual board member. You think, well, why should I even reply to this email? Because it's not going to make any difference anyway.
Yeah,
Do you see that? But I don't want to get out of order. I'm just giving you my mindset when these things occur.
And,
So I'll stop.
I'd like to respond to that because I think that we do need to build in a mechanism that during our meetings where folks can express their agenda items in the meeting. Like I've done it at the end of the meeting. I've also just emailed my, suggestion, but if you don't know that other people on the board are thinking the same thing, then how are you going to know if there's enough critical mass to make it something that should go on the agenda? So that's something
Absolutely.
that, but here's the deal. Do we need to talk about, that I would say to Jonathan, try doing this. But I feel like now we have to, everybody has to agree that we're going to do that before we do it. And it just seems at some point that seems like it's overdone. And so that's a question that I have for Renee and Sarah. We have later on the agenda a talk about putting the board superintendent working agreement on every single agenda just to review it. So that's on there. I'm assuming that we don't all have to vote to make that happen. I'm assuming that that is within the purview of the superintendent and the chair, but I could be corrected. So I'm hoping that you can help clarify those kinds of items.
I do have something to say, but I can wait.
Okay.
Yeah,
If-
yeah.
if-
I mean, the whole idea is that your agenda needs to serve your needs to accomplish the work that you need to accomplish. And the items that end up on your agenda need to be germane to actually being board work, and they need to be timely. Is this the right month's time to talk about this particular topic? And that's why the last time we got together, I really stressed that OSBA key dates calendar that Debbie did order a copy of, that lays out for boards every month of the year the things that OSBA recommends as a best practice, or that statute says the board's going to do these things in this month. And so that's like the first place where you start to build your agenda, is from that calendar. And then any other items that the superintendent knows about because they're related to the business work particular to Silver Falls that might not fall under that statute, like your conversation tonight about reconfiguring schools. This, that's something that the superintendent knew was timely. It falls under board work, and so it got added to an agenda. Jonathan would bring his perspective of what needs to happen in a certain time. And then there's just judgment. There's just common sense judgment. So like that board member that wanted to add that particular item to our agenda in our superintendent's first year as board chair, and I'm like, no, we're not. And it wasn't because I had any particular problem with that board member. It wasn't board work.
Right.
And if he had tried to bring it up using this provision of items on the business not on the agenda may be discussed, and I was overruled, and four board members said yes, well, then we would have talked about it, because it would have got added. So I think your process really is pretty clear. Scott has agreed already earlier tonight that he gets a request from a board member at least 5 working days prior to the meeting. He's going to translate that request over to the board chair, and it'll get added to the agenda, or it will not. And then Scott will reply back to the board member that made the request. And so there shouldn't be any surprises to anybody coming into the meeting when they see their packet. But maybe I'm missing something somewhere. And Shelley, you said you had more questions or comments or something. So let's hear from you.
Thank you very much. I am really liking the discussion that's happening here. I think it's really healthy for us to try to iron some things out that maybe aren't quite working for some board members. First of all, I'd like to say that this policy, this particular policy with amending the agenda at the beginning of the meeting has never been enforced in the 3 years that I've been on the board. And when I did learn that Jonathan and Jennifer were going to an Effective Meetings webinar from OSBA, and they came back with some ideas, and you know, I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. The ideas, great. And from the last meeting from August 24th, you know, Jonathan said, you know, and we're really going to try something new. We'll start today, but my expectation is that we'll continue this process. So when I was participating, well, Jennifer and I both participated in this OSBA Effective Meetings, I think it was called, training. One of the things that came out of it was there was several items that actually came out of it, was this idea of actually having the agenda reviewed and approved at the start of the meeting, which we both really liked. So with that statement, it's, you know, Jonathan and Jennifer liked the idea. They didn't even know it was in our policy. They didn't even know that it was in there. I don't think any of us knew that it was in the policy. The language was already pretty much in there. So it was new to us. It was new to us. And so my thought process was, okay, well, yeah, let's try it. You know, he's like, we're going to try something new.
Yeah.
And we'll start. And I'm like, okay. So we did that on August 24th. And then I discovered something going through that meeting. And I actually just want some clarification, really. We were talking about several items that night, and one of them was BF, Board Policy Development, multiple policies. And there was also DBEA, and then we also had some COVID policies that needed to be passed or approved for Dan Bush. And we were talking, we had a really healthy discussion about board policy development. It was item number 4, discussion item BF. And we were moving forward how to handle the policy. We were talking about the substance of the policy, changes, edits, and such. And Jonathan suggested to move it back to the policy work group. So Janet asked for a motion on it, and Jonathan agreed. So Janet made a motion to send this policy to the policy work group for further review. There was a second, and it was voted on to move it to the policy work group. Worked out well. And then we moved to policy DBEA, the budget committee. Again, we had a great, healthy discussion about this policy. Lots of good information from all the board members. And because of the time of year, we were supposed to appoint a budget committee member by August, according to our policy. And it was already September 14th. So as a result of the conversation, the board was leading to sending the policy back to the work group. And, you know, because Jonathan questioned, he was, I think I'm hearing that, you know, we want to send it back to the work group. But he wanted a little bit more specific information. And I said, well, the ideas coming out of the board members is critical to take back to the policy work group. And then Jennifer said, well, the budget committee selection is flexible. I don't think we have to appoint anybody before the first meeting, which is usually March or April. All right, it's very true. And then Jonathan, you know, he said, I love the opinions shared, the people, everybody's points. Does anyone else have anything to say? And then he said, I've heard enough to make me think that this policy should also be referred back to the work group for further consideration. I didn't hear any specific motion to move forward with a very particular idea. I would entertain one if you had one you wish to make right now, which is very common for Jonathan. He makes it very clear about that. And then I said, I'd just like to say that I'd like to delay appointing budget committee members at this point. We did that last year. We delayed until November. I think it would be healthy to move this to the policy work group and delay appointments until we have a final draft of the policy. And Jonathan promptly responded, Shelley, would you like to make a motion, please? And I said, you bet. And right when I started to make a motion to delay the appointment budget committee members and move policy DBEA to the work group, Jennifer interrupted me and spoke over me and stated, that is not on the agenda though. That is not on the agenda. I think if we want to do that, we either have to amend the agenda at the beginning of the meeting or put it on the next agenda for the next meeting so that people have time to reflect on it and think about it and gather information that they need. So Jonathan said, okay, well, can you, he said, that's a good point. Shelley, why don't you just make a motion to move the policy to the work group? So here's my question. When we amend a policy or an agenda at the beginning of a meeting, and we own it, but then we have discussion about further, we have really healthy discussion about the discussion topics. And the result of that discussion comes out to be that we need to make some board decisions, take some action, like on the date of, appointing the budget committee members and the policy. Why was I not allowed, or why were we not allowed to delay the appointment, but move the policy to the work group? So it's really just kind of, I'm not blaming anybody, anything. I just want to make sure I get this right, because it was said it's not on the agenda though. And I'm like, what's not on the agenda? Policy DBEA is, we're making a motion about this policy. So I guess I want some clarification, because that's what I had a problem with amending the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. Because then Jennifer said, you have to either make that amendment at the beginning of the meeting, or we have to move it to another meeting. I'm like, well, how would we know if we didn't discuss it to change it at the beginning of the meting?
Right.
So kind of, do you know what I mean?
I do know, and I would like to respond.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I get this correct.
Interrupt.
Yeah.
So in this policy right here, it says items of business not on the agenda may be discussed and acted upon if the majority of the board agrees to consider them. It does not say when that has to happen inside your meeting. And so anybody can make a motion at any time to amend the agenda and to add items to discuss. That is permitted by this policy. It is actually even permitted in law.
Okay.
So that provision exists. So you could have amended the agenda after the fact, after you're already in the middle of the agenda. It's not the best practice. The best practice is to identify items, on your agenda that are not there, that you believe should be there at the beginning of the meeting, so that, you can make the motion and add it to the discussion time, add it to the action time.
Right.
Add it to where it would fit appropriately in your agenda before you ever get going. But there's no law that is prohibiting you from having a motion in the middle of your board meeting to amend your agenda at that point in time to do it. The law does not prohibit that, but it's not the best practice to add things to agendas after they've already been adopted, because it kind of throws everybody off and they didn't know it was coming.
Okay.
But in relation to this particular instance where you were talking about the policy, those probably you could have done that because you were discussing that policy. So you could have done both things in that meeting. You could have referred back to the committee, and you could have made a motion to postpone identifying, when you were going to actually seat a budget committee member. And you might want to, when this policy comes back from the committee, and I don't know the members who are on the committee, but you might want to strike that language that says you will do it in August to you will do it
Right.
at some point prior to the first budget committee, considering you have applicants. I mean, you're not always going to get a full slate of applicants to fill budget committee vacancies. I remember reaching out to people that I thought would be good at that. And like, hey, Tina, would you consider serving on our budget committee? Would you apply? And then decided that was something she wanted to do. So, I mean, you guys are probably handcuffing yourselves more than you need to.
Thank
but
you.
At the same time,
yes,
you need to respect public meeting law. So public meeting announcements. So when you're having a meeting and you have to notice it, that's the terminology we use.
Right. Okay.
The language in the statute says that you need to list the principal subjects that you plan to discuss. You don't have to publish an agenda, for heaven's sakes. You just have to say, these are the principal subjects that we're going to talk about. It's usually easiest to do that through an agenda because those are, it lists everything. But the fact that you were talking about that policy, you could have done whatever the heck you wanted with that policy that night.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, Renee,
But
I have
who
a question.
I'm sorry, who decide, or how do we decide as a board, as a whole group, as to what is on the agenda as a result of our discussions or not? Do you see what I mean? Like Jennifer did think that, listen, that's not on the agenda, and we can't do that, and I respect that. But I want to make sure that I understand also, if there's something on the agenda that someone votes for, or, that someone makes a motion of, that I'm like, okay, yeah, we're within our parameters of, approving the agenda and making sure we're staying on task. So I think I just want a clarification because, we motioned to move the policy to the work group. But one of the motions, wasn't on the agenda, and I don't know that. I mean, who polices that? Who decides that? Right?
The board does. It's your
the board does. The group does, right? Not
it's
just
your
one
meeting.
person.
And that was why at the very beginning of our training tonight, when Sarah said, you guys really need to know the B section of your policies, because a lot of this conversation tonight, as a result of what happened in your August 24th meeting, probably didn't need to happen if you guys are all familiar with this policy, because you know your B section policies. So, so it's some of this onus is on you, on the 7 of you. You need to know your policies.
Right.
And then in addition, it's good to kind of talk through some of these things. And I want to get back to Jennifer because she said she had a question too.
Well, I asked that exact question during the best board effective meetings.
Webinar?
Yes, and it's on the recording and it says from me. I asked that question. I said, so is the beginning of the meeting the only time you can amend the agenda? And the presenter said yes.
I'll talk to him. He's new. He's new.
Well, so
now that
we have some things here that these lanes or whatever are starting to cross over each other, and it's creating tangles that aren't necessary. However, it sounds like there is a conflicting information. So what do we abide by and listen to if we are getting conflicting information?
Your policy, Lori. You abide by your policies, because those are the rules that you said are going to govern Silver Falls School District, and these are the rules that are going to govern us as a board. So your policy doesn't say items of business not on the agenda may be discussed and acted upon if the majority of the board agrees to consider them at the beginning of our meeting. Your policy doesn't stipulate when. So the when is up to you guys. Now, I apologize that I wasn't on that webinar when it took place, and I'll talk to the presenter, and you know, we're gonna have to figure out a way to like retract that. It's just
I
best.
hope I'm not wrong. Now that I've said that, I really hope I'm not wrong, but I'm pretty sure, because I had the same question. I'm like, you really, that's the only time you can amend the agenda? So
You can
We'll,
amend
we'll
it.
find out and get to the bottom of it, Jennifer.
okay, but to follow up though about who decides what we do, that's the chair. The chair gets to decide, makes those calls on how you're going to proceed, right?
No, the chair has no more authority than any other
No.
member of the board.
No.
He can make statements. He doesn't have to ask for the policies all the time, like Shelley explained that the motions all the time, like Shelley explained he's really good at. He can make a declaration by saying, hearing no dissent, let's send this policy back to the committee.
Okay,
And
but
if
that's
nobody-
not what I mean. I get that. That's not what I mean. He
Okay.
decides how to proceed. He's the master of ceremonies of the meeting. And
Yes.
he gets
Oh,
to
yeah.
decide if, like, so I said point of order to Shelley, because in point of order, you know, I said that I don't think we can do that because the public doesn't know we're considering delaying the selection of board members, or not committee members. So, but if Shelley and I disagree, Jonathan's the one that decides how to proceed.
He does, with a caveat. So he can, the expectation is that the board chair will rule on all points of order. And so if there's a point of order, like, is it appropriate? Can we add this to the agenda or not? He can rule on that to the point that nobody disagrees with his ruling. But if somebody makes a point of order and Jonathan rules on it and they don't like it, they can, I challenge the ruling of the chair.
Yeah, and that's a parliamentary procedure thing. Yeah, but Jonathan has to make that judgment first of this is how we're proceeding. And then if somebody wants to challenge it, they can do that through parliamentary procedure.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. So the chair does rule on all points of order. And then if anybody wants to overrule the chair on a point of order, then they can say, I challenge the ruling of the chair. And then at that point, the chair would say, well, what is your point? You know, what is it that you want to overrule? And you'd have that discussion, and then there would be a vote as to whether the rest of the board goes with this person who said, I think you're wrong, or if they go, you know, if the majority of the board supports the ruling of the chair.
Got it. And so I just have one more thing. When Shelley started her discussion about that piece, she did talk about putting the agenda approval on the agenda. And Shelley, you said they didn't know that the policy aligned with the practice of approving the agenda. What was your point on that, and what's your evidence? I'm feeling a little bit, I don't know, like put down.
I'm sorry, what was your
on that.
question again? What was your question again?
You said they didn't know. You were talking about Jonathan and I when we suggested that we put.
Oh.
You said they didn't know. They didn't know. And Jonathan tried to. I think Jonathan was a little upset because he tried to jump in and say. And so I also felt a little bit like, well, what point are you trying to make there? And why do you think that we didn't know that that was aligned with policy?
Oh, because when I went back to the August 24th work session, it's right at the beginning of the meeting. Jonathan, I just wanted to make sure that I had my information correct. And he said, and we really are going to try something new. We'll start today, but my expectation is that we will continue this process. So when I was participating, well, Jennifer and I both participated in this OSBA effective meetings, I think it was called, training. One of the things that came out of it was there were several items that actually came out of it. was this idea of actually having the agenda reviewed and approved at the start of the meeting, which we both really liked. And
So why did
so I wanted to, because it was a new idea, it was a new thought process that was brought to the board, which I will tell you, I did not, even in our board meeting policy right here, the BDDC, I did not know that approving the agenda, or, well, I didn't know the language of, that's in our policy right now. The agenda will be established, but no, I knew that. Order for the public to be included, the board, items of business on the agenda may be discussed and acted upon if the majority of the board agrees to consider them. That's basically the same language as approving the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. So that was already in our policy.
Well, why did you say that we didn't know?
Because the language here speaks that you didn't know that it was in there. We're going to try something new. Jennifer and I really liked it.
I think that's an assumption.
Our policy.
I think that's an assumption.
So, oh, well, did you know then? Did you know it was in our policy then?
I knew that Robert's Rules of Order were what we used in board policy.
Well, I'm talking about just our policy. Did you know it was in our policy then? Because
yes,
if I'm wrong, I'll admit I'm wrong if you already knew.
Well, I just wondered why you would say that to begin with.
Because it was something new.
Robert's Rules of Order is in our policy.
Right.
Follow it.
So, right.
And I know that. I'm very aware of that.
Okay. So it was when he was saying that, he said, we're going to try something new.
It was new because we haven't been doing it.
So I'm going to interrupt here with a point of order, just because I think we need to carry on. I disagree as well, but I'm not going to belabor it tonight. So
well, you can go listen to the video. I mean, I'm not blaming you guys. I'm just saying that I don't think any of us knew that it was actually in our board meeting agenda policy. I really don't. And so
I'm not sure. I feel like you were calling us out in that statement.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
That's how I felt about that. And so I just wanted to give you that feedback.
Oh, well, thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, and I'll second that. So I think I want to make sure if anybody has any additional questions as it relates to agenda items, getting them on the agenda, I want to make sure we cover it because this seems to be a big concern. We've talked a lot about it. I feel like I learned some things. I like the idea that we're clarifying that it goes to the superintendent. The fact that it went to the chair, as Jennifer mentioned, that's based on past practice. It turns out it was based on a past working agreement. I sort of inherited that in the back of my mind. I hadn't cross-checked it with policy, but I like the idea that we're going to be really clear about it. It goes to the superintendent. The superintendent will discuss it with the chair. They will collectively make a decision. The superintendent will communicate it back to board members. And if it's not on the agenda, and if the answer is it's not board business, then it's just, that's the answer. If the answer is we'll try to get it into a future agenda, but it's not, you know, urgent and we have other urgent business, then that's the answer, right? So we just, but I like the clarity, but I want to make sure if anybody has additional questions.
I do.
Lori, I see your hand up.
Yeah, with what you just said, Jonathan, is interpreted as a board member like myself, it's potentially a crapshoot. I mean, that's what I'm hearing, that if it's not going, if it potentially does not become, I guess, acknowledged on the...
Acknowledged would be the wrong word.
Oh, excuse me, to place it on the agenda and then to say, well, I'm sorry, we can't do that. I have a second opportunity to possibly amend in a meeting. Right. And then if that's shot down, there could be, you could say, well, you know, maybe we can put it on the agenda down the road, which to me is saying as soon as somebody turns the sun off and we'll put it on the agenda. To me, it's I guess I'd rather just hear the word no and hear a solid explanation than be given the hope that it might, when in fact it doesn't.
Fair enough.
That's where I'm coming from as a board member, and it
Yeah.
does happen. And so that's it. That's all I'm going to say. It just sounds like there's no guarantee.
Well, there
And
isn't a
not any
guarantee, Lori.
Yeah,
Lori,
there isn't. Right.
Yeah, just asking doesn't mean it gets on the agenda. But
Who
And-
decides what's board? Oh, I'm sorry.
who decides what's board work and not board
Yeah.
work? Well,
Yeah.
in this instance, it's going to be the superintendent and the chair that are going to decide that, because obviously the board member that wanted his item placed on the agenda with my first, year superintendent, got told no because it wasn't board business. Now, we addressed his concerns. We addressed them in a different way than having it addressed in a board meeting because it wasn't board business. But we went out of our way in that particular instance to accommodate that individual board member and the concern that he had, but it didn't happen at a board meeting. And so if something is not board business and you are told that as an individual board member, but yet you think it is board business, well, then just ask, how is this not board business? And allow Scott to give you that explanation. Because he's going to call you or in some way communicate with you that he heard your request to add this item, that, he and the chair discussed it. They determined it's not board business and he's getting back to you now. And at that point you can have a conversation and say, oh, well, it seemed to me like it's board business. How is it that it's not board business? And then the superintendent, Scott, can explain that to you. He's 3 months on the job. He's learning this along with you. Let's give this some time to play out and allow this increased understanding from the conversation tonight to have some time to be put into practice. And then let's critique it, like in 3 months from now or so. I'm not stating that as a definitive.
Right.
But let's check back in. How is this working? Are you good with that, Scott? He's good with it. He nodded.
And I think, and Renee, I deeply appreciate what you're sharing because I think it's fine to try something, but let's give it a beginning and an end. And then just come back to the board and say, hey, how's this working with everyone? And I think that's really what I was seeking. And it sort of felt like the decision was already made. But I'm glad we're talking about it. But thank you for
as
that
far as
information.
approving your agenda at the start of the meeting, I don't think you should ever stop doing that. Personally, my personal opinion. That just, as Sarah explained, the board has then said, yes, we agree. This is what we're talking about tonight. This is the business that we're going to do, is send the message to the public. They know this is the business the board is going to undertake tonight. And so I think you should continue that practice ad infinitum forever in Silver Falls, that practice. You have this policy and we already discussed it. Any board member can propose in a meeting, at any time in a meeting, and a motion to amend the agenda to add items that are not on the agenda. So now you know there's clarification around that. That exists, that's in policy. The state law allows for that. So there's no real reason to revisit this. But what I am suggesting a conversation about is this process of sending an item to Scott, Scott bouncing that off of the chair, Scott responding back to the board member with the item in question, with the decision that was made, ready to offer an explanation, and board members reflecting on how's Scott doing with that? Is that working? Is Scott actually giving us an explanation with the decision that was made? It's not the process of whether items get placed on an agenda per se, or whether you add and approve it at the beginning of the meeting or amend the agenda. It's more of the conversation around how is Scott doing with this explanation piece of items that get on or items that don't get on. Revisit that conversation in about 3 months or so.
I have one more quick question. And this is just language in our policy for Scott. And for us too, to make sure it's clear. So it says that the, excuse me, the agenda will be established by the superintendent and the board chair. So currently the practice is that the chair, the vice chair, the superintendent, and the assistant superintendent get together once or twice a week and discuss things, which is totally fine. But do we need to think about bringing this policy to the policy work group to make sure that, our language is correct as far as that practice goes? Or is that just kind of a, tweak, like that's fine, it doesn't really need to be changed? What are your thoughts on that, Renee or Sarah?
I think your policy is pretty clear.
Okay.
When you look at the board officer policy, which I know wasn't on our agenda to talk about tonight, but the BCB specifically about the board officers. The vice chair needs to be able to step in if something happens and the chair isn't able to do that. Well, it's really helpful if the vice chair is part of that agenda setting session in case, Jonathan falls suddenly ill and can't get to the meeting. Well, at least the vice chair then was in on that meeting that established the agenda and understands it. I don't think you need to include the vice chair in that second statement.
Because we have another policy that kind of overlaps with it, that does that thing. Okay,
all together. So your board officer policy says the vice chair needs to be able to step in and run a meeting if the chair is unable to do that. Well, what is one of the best ways to equip a board vice chair to run a meeting than to have them in the agenda setting process from the beginning?
I just wanted to make sure that the language is right. While you're here, I'm kind of, tapping into you right now. But just, I wanted to make sure that the board, that we had some policies that kind of overlap that covered that. And, it was, if we had to change anything in this particular policy, which is totally fine.
My personal opinion is I don't think you need to.
Okay, great. Yeah,
it's
perfect.
always your prerogative because it's your policy and it's,
well, that's true. But
it's your rules for how you're going to do your business as a board.
Totally fine. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Renee, I do have one more question, and it's kind of a gray area because it has more to do with the agenda, I would say, but it also has to do with how the meeting is run. So one of the things that came out of that webinar was the idea of the speaking chart and going in order when you speak, when you're responding during a discussion item. And when we first talked about this, I was like, well, I don't know if we need it or not. Let's just see, and I took some informal data just to see. After the first time I took the data, I was like, whoa, I think we need this just because we're on Zoom, because it's hard to see who's raising their hand. And so it would be really helpful to go through and have an order and have it rotate every meeting so that it's predictable and that your chance to talk is next. So we have that on our list for future meetings to talk about. Is that something that the board needs to talk about and approve? Does there need to be action on that? Is that something that the board chair and the superintendent take care of? Where does that fall?
I'd like to call a point of order at the moment. The motion that I made at the beginning of the meeting was to just talk about the specific agenda, or approving the agenda. And we did not, we even narrowed it down to take away 3 items to 1. And one of them was the tally chart.
Right.
So I don't think are we supposed, to me right now, that's not on the agenda.
I'm assuming this is part of the agenda.
No, in a
I just want to make sure.
Right, a training is different than a business meeting. So
Okay,
you were in a training, you were in a workshop. The public meeting notice was you were going to discuss the things that you discussed at the beginning before OSBA came on, and then you were going to discuss this transition plan training with OSBA. We can go anywhere tonight we want to go in respect to what what you want to talk about and how you need to learn. So
Oh, okay, okay.
because you're with OSBA and we're discussing your transition plan, and part of the transition
Okay.
plan is that everybody, the board, all the members of the board and Scott have a shared understanding, you know, that collective, collaborative
Right.
governance we talked about, you know, having shared understanding. So you have this policy BDD on board meeting procedures. It's pretty standard boilerplate language. You have to have a quorum, obviously. You know, you actually have to vote. You're not a consensus building body. You're not going to come to consensus. You're going to vote on things. All your votes are going to be recorded in the meeting, in the minutes. And if it's unanimous, it's easy to just say unanimous. And you already have the list at the top of your minutes of who was present. So if it's not unanimous, then you'll need to list them by name, who voted which way. If you're going to abstain, you got to declare it and state the reason why you are abstaining from any vote. And then you have this thing about parliamentary procedure. If you want, you can add another item about a speaking chart. But really all that the speaking chart is just a tool to ensure what Robert's Rules of Order state, in that the majority will decide, but the minority will be heard. I mean, that's kind of the basics of Robert's Rules of Order, is that the minority have a chance to talk, but the majority ultimately decides. Well, if you have a speaking chart, it allows the chair to keep track. Has Shelley spoken? Has Janet spoken? Has Irv spoken? Has Tom spoken? Has Jennifer spoken? Has Lori spoken? And have I spoken? And it's a way then for the board chair to just kind of make sure that everybody has had an opportunity to discuss, and that nobody is grandstanding and you know, taking all the oxygen out of the room because they're the only ones you ever hear from. And so it's just a tool to help you help the board chair keep track and make sure that everybody has been heard from. That's that minority be heard from, so that everybody gets a chance to talk. And then you make the decision, and the majority then rules, whatever the decision is. And so you have here that you're going to follow Robert's Rules as modified for small boards. And that you've stated we have to have a second in order for us to move on before we vote on something. And that you can close or limit debate. It'll be acceptable. You can say, we're only going to talk about this for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, we're making a decision. You can do that by this policy. Or we're going to limit debates that everybody gets 3 minutes on this particular topic. That's 21 minutes to discuss this because there's 7 of us, and we'll each get 3 minutes. You can limit debate by saying, you don't get to talk a second time until everybody has talked the first time. So we're talking about school uniforms, and we're going to hear from everybody, but we're not going to hear from anybody a second time until everybody who wants to speak has had a chance to speak a first time. You can limit your debate in any way that is acceptable. And if you want to use a speaking chart to help keep track of what order somebody's going to talk in, that's your choice. It's just a tool to help you get your end result of hearing from everybody.
I'm sorry, that's whose choice? The chair or the board?
Well, it's always the board, Shelley. Everything is always the board.
Okay, I just want to, Renee, I just need some things clarified out loud. Okay. So
it can be the chair if there's no dissent. I mean, the chair can declare anything.
Right.
And if there's no dissent, that falls under Robert's Rules of Order that you said are going to be here. So like, you don't need a motion to adjourn a meeting. You can, the chair can say, we've worked all the way through our agenda, hearing no dissent, meeting adjourned. He pauses for a little bit to see if there's any dissent. Here's none, gavels the meeting, it's over with. So you don't need a motion, you don't need a second, you don't need to vote on adjournment. Anything can be done that way.
Right.
Because that falls under Robert's Rules of Order.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is that policy would not have to be updated should we choose to agree to do this as a board. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are over our allotted time for the training this evening, and we did not finish what we were going to go through, which is fine because we're going to schedule again to meet, and we're going to complete any work from this session. We're going to pick up with the policies, go through our communication protocols, and then we will move into roles and responsibilities. So what I would like, and probably come from Jonathan, is we're going to work out when is the best time for Renee and I to come back and finish up with this, move on to roles and responsibilities. And we can continue any conversations around, you know, your meetings, your agendas, etc. And a recommendation might be for board members to do a little homework and go through your policies A and B. And that way you know all of your policies as relates to administration and boards. Any last minute questions before Renee and I pop off and let you all move on with your meeting?
Well, I have a question that I'm sorry, I don't want to belabor things, but you just said you were going to talk to Jonathan. Well, is that because Jonathan engaged OSBA in the superintendent search and that's why we're doing it, or should it be Scott?
It actually can be either, it can be both. It's really just because Jonathan is the chair, and that's just typically how OSBA generally works when it comes to scheduling things. It's through either the chair or the superintendent. Lately, I've been talking to Jonathan.
Okay, just
Typically,
clarifying,
I think
given our
Yeah.
new clarity around agenda items that they're supposed to go through the superintendent, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, it's just a housekeeping thing. And unfortunately, we didn't get to that meeting about the policy about communicating outside of meetings, and we'll get to that next time. But it's just kind of this housekeeping thing. And so it's like whomever, I mean, it could be Debbie, you know, we don't care, but however you determine dates for upcoming meetings and when you're holding work sessions, whatever that process is, just somebody communicate back to us when you think you're available for a meeting. And I've had it in my, you know, I've been training boards for 15 years. And so in my career, it's been board secretaries, board chairs, or superintendents. So Sarah's just been working with Jonathan. So that's just the name she used.
Oh.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Sarah, if I may, I have just a possibility. I wanted to know if during a work session, if we could have Ms. Sessler come and be the parliamentarian to show us where we can be more efficient and move things along more smoothly, because I'm not overly confident that any one of us on the board really knows how to do that well. So if that's a possibility, because I think when you said that sometimes we handcuff ourselves too much as a board, I really want to get rid of those handcuffs. And it would be nice for us to consider maybe having you as a parliamentarian or someone who's just sitting there listening and say, okay, let's clarification your policy, da, da, da. Because I think when we come to these meetings, we're trying to focus on what we're discussing, and it's hard to kind of also pick up the role of, is this the proper way in which to do something? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely it does.
No.
And there's many.
Just an idea.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. There's many options available to you still under the transition plan.
Oh, nice.
Next time we meet, we should be utilizing the 6 hours at that point, and you will still have more hours available. And so if the board wants to ask for, you know, a parliamentary procedure review or whatnot, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, be part of those hours from the transition plan, that's definitely something I think we can work out with you. So just let us know.
You bet.
All right. Anything else? Oh, Renee.
I would be happy to do that for you as long as I'm still working for OSBA. I don't know if I announced my retirement to you guys or not, but I am retiring in the month of November. So
Oh my goodness.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's great.
so if you could use my services as a part of this transition plan time that's allotted to you, so there's no additional service agreement with OSBA to pay for my time, then I'd certainly be more than happy to help you guys out with that before
I think we should consider that right away, frankly, as a board. Thank you, Renee, and congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, it's certainly well earned, but we are very sad to see her go.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
definitely.
All right, well, I think then we will leave you and let you move on with your agenda, and then we will look forward to getting scheduled to come back and jump back into it all. So take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Renee.
Bye-bye.
Okay. We do have additional board business tonight. I'm pulling up. So under 5 discussion and action items, our first item up for discussion is a conversation about the board superintendent working agreement. This came up when we were discussing, well, I think it came up almost by accident, but it came up when we were discussing the fact that at the beginning of admin meetings, they begin it with sort of a series of guidelines. I think, Scott, you said that you guys actually read them at the beginning. Did I remember that right?
Yeah, and the thought is that we just center ourselves around what our agreements are. And whenever I meet with admin, I've done this so much of my career, we read our meeting norms or guiding principles, if you will. And we all develop those together in collaboration, and then we sign that document together, and then we read it every single meeting. We meet once a week. And it's just the act of going through it to, just the whole metacognition of being centered around the agreements that we've made. It's also just an act of humility that we take, that we're here to do business as a team, and we're here to operate as a team in the best interest of Silver Falls School District. And I think it's a good idea for us to consider. I'd really like to consider that. I think what happens 99% of the time when we have operating agreements is folks forget about them. And it's just a way to make them pertinent. We all agree to them. We've all collaborated around them. I think it's an important step as a team.
I'm interested to hear what others think. Like I said, I've spoken with Scott about it, but this is the chance for the board to share your collective thoughts on this, and for us to consider whether this is something we want to do in the future. We don't have to decide tonight, but it is something that I would like to get feedback on.
Well, I'll speak first. I think it's a great idea. I welcome it. Thank you very much. And if we vote on it at another time to add that to our practices, I would fully support it. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Shelley. Irv.
Jonathan, if that is something our superintendent, Scott Drew, wants to do, I'm going to stand behind him 100%. And that's where I'm going to leave it.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, Jonathan?
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, no, yeah, that sounds like a fine idea too. It doesn't, that constant reminder of every time of, how you act and what it's there for. And yeah, sometimes we all I agree with the statement that we oftentimes make agreements and then over time we just forget them. And
Yeah.
I think staying within the lines is a reminder to stay within the lines is a good idea. Yes, thank you.
I was just going to say that I support it as well. I think it's a great idea. I don't know if we would read the whole thing. If we needed to, I'm certainly fine with that. There might be a way that we can sort of summarize it in a way that feels kind of like that's a little bit more doable at the beginning of meetings, but I'm fine with either approach. I think the spirit of it is excellent. So thank you for that idea.
I think it's a great idea. And I support it.
I wonder about the approach that we take. In my work too, every meeting that we have, we review the norms, and we call it popcorning in education speak, where it's just posted, and then somebody starts it, and the next person says number 2, the next person says number 3. So that's a suggestion that I have, but considering Janet's comment about, you know, the whole thing, another approach could be like maybe board members choose a different one that they want to highlight and read every time, so that it's personal, but then we only have 7 of them that we're going through and not however many items there are. So those just 2 ideas that I'm
happy to go with your thinking about that. The administrators will tell you that I love to cold call. It just keeps everybody on the edge of their seats, but I'll leave the process up to you.
Yeah, I think one of the questions on the table was, well, the things that came to my mind had to do with how long does it actually take to read? I haven't tried it. I don't really know. It's only a 1.5 pages-ish, page and a quarter. I don't know. It's not near as long as the
Couple minutes.
Yeah, a few minutes. It probably would go through fairly quick. Having said that, is it also something that we want to, again, to bounce back and forth between board members? Do we want a board member at each meeting to be designated? Do we want to have the chair read it? What are people's thoughts on that as well? Because I think it's pertinent to what we decide, right? I mean, I don't want to unilaterally try to make any decision on that piece.
Could we possibly take this opportunity or to think about it, and then maybe come back at our next meeting and, you know, share our thoughts and, you know, how we might want to implement it?
I think that's a great idea. I have no issue. I didn't anticipate deciding tonight because it was our first conversation about it. The other thing that came to my mind was what, you know, maybe phase 1, and maybe we even decide on this tonight. I don't know. It's up to you guys, right? We speak as a board, as they just said. What if we show it at the beginning of the meeting, even if we're not reading it, right? That might be something also that we could do that is innocuous to some extent. It doesn't involve additional time, but it's very visible, kind of like the flag is when we do the flag salute, but you know, we make sure it's visible and it's on everybody's mind. So there's also the potential to do that while we think about reading it or reading parts of it, how we want to proceed with that.
To me, that seems really, like, I don't know who would be opposed to just putting it up at the beginning of the meeting and just taking a couple minutes for people to personally review it. That seems really safe to me. I think reading things out loud and appointing people, I think people might have different opinions on that. But to me, putting it up and allowing time for people to review it is super safe.
I would agree that we could start out doing that. And then in the meantime, we can think about other ways of doing it and present it at the next meeting.
Okay. Well, in honor of Renee's presentation, Renee and Sarah, maybe what I'll say is, without dissent, we'll plan on presenting it at the beginning of our meetings and carry on additional conversation should we get this on another agenda to talk about possibly reading it in the future. How does that sound? Okay.
That sounds great.
Excellent. Scott, anything additional you want to add before we Carry on.
No, I don't think so. I just think that I would encourage you to consider reading it. I think it's a best practice when we talk about teaching and learning. We want kids to interact with text just like we as adults interact with text. And I think it's just really, really important because we will get to the point where we have it memorized, but the public sees that we're taking it extremely serious when we actually take the time to read it. So I'm just encouraging you. I'll go with whatever the will of the group is on that, of course. And if it happens naturally down the road, that's fine too.
Right.
Just
I've
the
got it on the
teacher, we
list.
couldn't let that go.
I have it on the list for possible future agenda items, and I think we'll start here and see where we get.
Fair enough.
Okay. So that takes us to 5B, which is the re-revised 2020-2021 school calendar due to the fires and having to reshuffle things around yet again, unfortunately, right? Crisis on top of crisis. So I don't remember, Scott, if you were presenting that or if Dan was, but whoever is, feel free to present and to share your thoughts on it.
Yeah, the both of us will, and Dan, I'll be happy to turn it over to you in a minute. But I just want to kind of clue everybody into making up instructional days, because it's not just the 10 that we lost during the wildfires. It's the 4 that you originally approved as well.
Oh.
And so that's 14 days, right? And so we have a plan to make up 10 of those days, and we'll talk about that. The 4, I've been working with Colt Gill, and we're going to enter into a waiver issue. Both
Okay.
Colt Gill and Scott Nine I've been in contact with. He's the deputy superintendent. Colt Gill, as you know, is the executive director of ODE. And so we'll do a waiver for that, so we don't have to make up those days. But just keep that in mind. We're making up a lot of days. And so,
Yeah.
Dan, do you want me to continue, or do you want to?
You're doing fine, unless you want me to,
Sure.
I can talk nuts and bolts of the calendar, but I think you've got it either
So
way.
the gist of it is that we've worked with SFEA, and we went through and we took every non-student day. So a day that would have been scheduled for staff development, the state in-service day, any day that there weren't students but teachers had to report to work, we took and had that count for one of the days we'd have to make up. I believe we added one day to the end of the year, Dan. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, the additional days that were added besides like conference days and things like that were President's Day
and the day
became a school day, and then we added one day to the end of the school year, June 18th, which means teachers come back on the 21st.
So the teachers, SFEA brought it back to their members, and it's a good deal for them. We believe strongly, and because Dan and I are not just, in senior management, we're also teachers and we're practitioners, and adding days to the end of the year doesn't solve a thing. Everybody's checked out. It doesn't help. We'd rather take the years during the school year and have have a higher focus on those days and get more out of our kids than have to extend the year into June. And we're just speaking from a practical standpoint as teachers ourselves. And it's just not the way we want to go. And that's the reason why we had to go and scoop up the non-student days.
Okay.
And I'll also say that we worked this out with our classified folks, because they have different calendars. There's 10-month classified employees, there's 11-month, and there's 12-month. And they were quick to come to the table and work with us. And we really wanted to make it right by especially our 10-month folks, because all of those non-student contact days that are now student contact days are not on their regular calendar. So we had to do some creative work there with our classified folks to make sure there was it was fair for both groups, for all employees.
And it's more than fair. It really is. It is. you know, wildfires happen once in a lifetime, and
We hope.
hopefully, and you know, at the end of the day, it's a very fair thing for both employee groups.
And I would
Janet,
just agree with Scott, you know, I'm looking at it right now, and, you know, seeing all these 5-day school weeks, I think is going to be really great for kids with, you know, no interruptions. So I think it's a really good schedule, and I appreciate both associations coming to the table to get this hammered out so that we could give our parents a calendar and get it to you for this board meeting.
go ahead, Janet.
I just had a quick question. Does it create any problems for professional development time for our staff? If that time is being transferred over, does that leave them in any kind of a problem?
Well, yeah, it does. I mean, it takes away those days that we could use to organize professional development, but we do have professional learning community time on Mondays throughout the year. That's a really good thing. And, you know, I just think it's one of those things where we're still in a remote environment too. We just didn't know any other way around it, because extending the days in June is basically just burning them. It just doesn't work.
I know.
Yeah.
So yeah, Janet, the Mondays was our, you know, kind of with the students will still get instruction pushed out to them, but that Mondays in both the comprehensive distance learning and hybrid have much more, as Scott was saying, PLC time and opportunities to collaborate. So yeah, we just may have to get some, you know, get creative a little bit if we really need to do some PD, especially as we're still just grappling with Edgenuity and Canvas and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why we wanted 2 weeks of pre-service too.
Well, I'm glad they were supportive of it, and that's I mean, that's wonderful. You guys found a way to make it work, which, you know,
Yeah.
you kind of had to make lemonade out of lemons there. So
Yeah.
good job.
Now,
Okay.
once we get to good times, if we get there, right, we get back into a swing of things and we're back in school, the professional development for Silver Falls School District will change dramatically. And I will share plenty of that information once we start to get to a point where we can do that.
Awesome.
But right now we're in an online environment. We're dealing with a different instructional model, and we're trying to implement tools to set teachers up for success, and with Edgenuity and Canvas as a new learning system. And we're just trying to make the best experience possible for kids this year.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate all the work that went into it as well. This is an action item for the board, so we do have to act on it to make it official. I would accept a motion tonight to approve the updated school calendar for 2020-2021.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the revised 2020-21 school calendar.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay. Debbie, will you please?
Yes. Jonathan,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yay.
Janet,
Yes.
Tom,
Aye.
Lori,
Yes.
Shelley,
Yes.
Irv,
Yes.
all in favor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Next up is some more amazingly hard work and good news. We've got a classified contract that we are looking to ratify. So
Yay.
great.
It's a
Yeah,
big deal.
Yeah, I'm really excited to bring this forward to you. It was uploaded to Board Book at the beginning this evening. Really wish I could have gotten this to you a few weeks ago. It is actually a very complicated process to take new language, embed it into the old, and really, you know, it's not something it really needs kind of individual attention, and it just, with all that's been going on, interruptions have been aplenty. So got it done for you there. I did share this with our classified leadership to say, this is what I'm sending to the board for approval. And they both emailed me and said that looks close. We still have work to do collaboratively to make sure what goes, to the public. We didn't miss any details. Again, just taking what we agreed upon and bringing it into a final document. I hope that makes sense. So I'm hoping for ratification tonight, and I do want to, I'll publicly thank our classified folks for just as collaborative as the environment was. But I wanted to also let you know that next month at our board meeting we will start having a classified employee give a report similar to SFEA. So I thought that might be a good time to also, bring this back up of our excitement about this agreement with a member of our local classified union. So I just want to put that on your radar, and I'm happy to answer any questions about this bargaining agreement if you have any.
I had a chance to review it. There's a lot of changes. Some of them are you could summarize pretty rapidly, right? There's a lot of word changes, but yet you can kind of summarize. I appreciate all the hard work that went into it. It sounds like if we ratify it tonight, based on what you just said, there are still a handful of maybe I dotting and T crossing that has to happen. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's all it really is, Jonathan, and making sure what I pulled in from the documents that we TA'd, tentative agreed, got pulled in here accurately. And then one of the things you'll see on the table of contents that's highlighted is it just, the overall document needs some update, some housekeeping. And so we agreed after it's ratified that 2 teams from each group will get together, and some of the sequencing of numbers to letters in terms of, you got something that's listed as 1 and then it goes to A. It's a little wonky and it just needs some cleaning, some housekeeping. So there's a little housekeeping, but nothing in here is substantially going to change. And if it does, I would certainly bring it before you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this?
Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Tom. It's a lot of work.
And if you wonder, I'll just throw this out there just because I'm scrolling through looking at it. If you wonder, Article 7, Association Rights and Responsibilities, you will see a lot of yellow on that. That is a majority, well, I shouldn't say a majority, but that is a lot of House Bills 2016, which was passed last year, which really enhanced union rights. And so a lot of this is brand new language that comes from that law. So if you're wondering why is there so much stuff in 7, it's all coming from that House bill.
No. Well, this too is an action item for us tonight. I would accept a motion to ratify the amended classified collective bargaining agreement.
Janet or Tom should do it.
I'll go ahead. I'd like to make a motion to ratify the classified bargaining agreement for, what is the term? Does it have a term?
That's a great question, Janet. And so it is a 3-year term with a reopener for economics. So I'm glad you said that. So the language is till 2023, but we will, because of the uncertain economic uncertainties, we will reopen in the spring to discuss economics. And both parties can bring, I think we both said both parties could bring 2 language articles. So we will be re-engaging in it, but the bulk of the agreement is for 3 years till 2023. So good, great question.
Okay. So if I can make a motion to approve that, to ratify that as presented this evening.
So moved.
I'd like to second it.
Oh, very good.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay. Deb?
Jonathan,
Yay.
Jennifer,
Yes, please.
Janet,
Yes.
Tom,
Aye.
Lori,
Yes.
Shelley,
Yes.
and Irv.
Yes.
All in favor.
Motion
Thank you.
passes. Ratified. Again, thank you for all the hard work. I can appreciate exactly how much work goes into that. So
Thank you, Dan. Dan, how late were you up on the last night, you and Janet, on the last night of bargaining?
It was about 11 o'clock, wasn't it, Janet?
Oh,
Mhm.
wow.
And
About
you didn't
11,
think you were
11:30.
you didn't think you were going to get it done, right?
Oh, well, funny story there. We knew we had gotten close, and it was about 8:30, and we knew we had a major breakthrough, and a couple of their members said, well, obviously we're close. Let's get another date on the calendar and we'll finish it up. And one of their team members just said, no, let's get her done. And so at that point I knew we were locked in till I did not want to leave without an agreement. So it took another 3 hours to get us there, but
Oh.
it was
They got it done.
yeah. Well, when you get to that final home stretch, it gets, we knew we'd had major breakthrough, but those final little I's and T's do take a little bit of time.
And I'll just say that those last few hours were actually really wonderful and inspiring, because the sentiment of the entire team, because we were at that point to sort of the nitty gritty of the economics, but the sentiment of the entire team was, let's do the absolute best for these folks that we can.
Yeah.
And we kind of just pulled all sorts of things out of our hats at that point. Like, what can we do with this? And what can we do with that? And can we add this? And can we do that? And it was just really inspiring and heartwarming. And when we came to an agreement, we headed over to the Black Box, which is where their team was caucusing, and just shared mutual congratulations and thanks and gratitude. So it was really pretty tremendous.
The way it should be.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I just want to say thank you to Janet. That was I was only able to make maybe half of the meetings. That was a lot more meetings than I remember these took in the past. And with COVID and work, I wasn't able to make them near as much. But Janet was virtually always there, and the whole team. You guys did a great job. Thank you for pulling that heavy load on both sides.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your dedication, you guys. Really, it's a lot of work. I commend you. I hail you. Really, thank you so much for making it such a great success. Dan, Janet, the team. What a great note to end on.
Yeah.
On this meeting.
Yeah.
Really, I'm just going out of this room with a big smile on my face. Can't wait to tell my husband about it. So it's a good note to end on. Thank you.
Well, remember all these good feelings, because Michelle Livingston, who's a classified employee at Mark Twain, she's going to be the board person to speak to the board next month. So these good feelings, we got to make sure Michelle feels them next month.
Oh, bring it on. Let's go. I love it. The more the merrier.
Right. So that concludes our regular agenda. Is there any additional board business we need to consider tonight before adjourning?
I just wanted to give a heads up that we missed the first installment of our superintendent evaluation. And so we're doing that on the next meeting, the October regular meeting.
A regular board meeting, not work session.
I think that's the plan, yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
Regular.
we haven't established the agenda yet, but that's our tentative plan.
That's what we missed the regular meeting where it was scheduled. And so this is the next regular meeting.
Thank you for sharing with that with us tonight. That's really appreciated. I mean, I'm serious, because I'm glad you did, because I'll get to work on that tomorrow and finish up my information. So thank you for sharing that. That really does help tonight.
I'm glad I remembered.
Me too.
Yeah, Jonathan?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, this is Tom. Yeah. So this is for Scott. Do we have any upcoming report or any type of information, in the next few meetings about how are the kids doing in this learning environment?
Yeah.
I'm really you know, I'm really
Sure.
concerned about, well, I'm just concerned about all this. You know, we've heard there's been so many kids locked up looking at screens,
Yeah.
and that's all anyone's doing now is looking at screens. I just don't know how, you know, I'd like some information. I don't know how you would measure that. I guess we can
Sure,
start
Tom.
with attendance, how that's
Yeah.
done, but we can also, I'm also concerned is that information getting sent back up to the state? Is the state asking for this? And I'm kind of asking a pointed question. You know, we're getting every detail about this COVID, which is a serious
Yeah.
thing. And we're getting detailed information about its effect on the economy and the forecasts on the effect of the economy. But I'm just not hearing any questions or information about how this is affecting our kids. And, you know, and it's just platitudes. You know, we've heard so much over the past couple of years about social emotional learning and some of the negative effects of screen time. And then here comes the COVID, and that's all anybody does is sitting and looking at screens. And I'm really concerned. I don't know how to measure it. I don't know. I'm just curious as to how we as a society, how this district and as a state are looking to measure this. I'm concerned that they're not really concerned. I mean, I know they're concerned, but I don't see them asking, you know, anyway, I think you understand the question. Thank
Yes, I do. And thank you, Tom. And yes, we will have data. Our kids will be assessed in another couple weeks as we get underway. In fact, within the next 2 weeks. So we will have academic data. We'll also have some data around social emotional learning. But the one thing I can't say enough is, and one thing that we can assume as adults is the data isn't better, right? The data that students, that there has been academic harm done to our students because they haven't been in school, right? And last year we did no assessment. No assessments were done last year formally in any school district in Oregon. So what we have is pre-COVID data, and now we have the data from the fall. And so we will have those 2 points to compare. And I suspect, you know, it's going to take a number of years to catch up. I do. And that's just being a realist and a pragmatist about this, that it's going to take some time once we get the kids back to brick and mortar buildings to truly address social emotional learning the way we need to, as well as the other academic areas. So we truly are at the mercy of the metrics that have been set forth by Marion and Clackamas County. But I'm happy to share that data as we receive it, if not at the next board meeting, then the one after that.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a sobering thought. It really is.
Yeah.
And the online format is not something that we've been trained as experts in. So I would say it's been a monumental effort to get to this point. In fact, I think it's almost heroic on our teachers' part. None of us know exactly this is going to end.
And if I'll just
For
add
sure.
to that,
No,
Tom,
please.
Tom, we did get a notification from ODE that they do want us reporting related to this. I think I don't want to speculate on what it is they're asking for, but Leslie and I talked briefly today about making sure we were getting the information.
I just got the email, I think, today.
Yeah. So getting information, I think, related to what your concerns are, Tom. And so we will, we just got that within the last week. And so we will, Leslie and I were talking about who is going to be kind of collecting that. And then and then maybe we can update you on what that is, because I do think it's related to some of your concerns that you're bringing up that ODE is asking for. Because I do think they want to share that up the chain to say, you know, there's, you know, other costs that maybe we're not paying attention to. So the decision makers that get to make decisions for us can have the data. We can't make decisions without data.
Yes, for exact. Thank you. Perfect. And yeah, that's my concern. Just knowing that there is data going upstream toward them, and Scott, you touched on it. There's some concern in my voice, and please don't anybody listening think that I don't think every administrator and teacher and staff from top to bottom is working their tail off in this district.
Sure, absolutely, Tom. Absolutely.
So it wasn't, that's I know everyone's working the best they can, but society isn't structured for everyone to be an online learner, and I know parents are really struggling, kids are struggling. So, but we all got it's a tough situation everyone's in. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Shows. Well, thank you, Tom. But I certainly didn't take it that way, Tom. But thank you for mentioning.
Yeah, you bet.
And it was a good first day of school. Knock on wood. Knock on wood. We did not have a Salem. We did not have a Salem today.
Good.
Yay.
Yay.
That's good.
That's cause for celebration.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. And without objection, we will adjourn. Night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
All right. Good night.
Good night.